Today's webinar is probably, it could be one of the most important talks you ever listen to about your career. I'm going to talk today about what makes attorneys happy and successful and what makes attorneys fail in terms of their careers. And I've been watching this for 25 years, and there's a certain mindset that attorneys have to succeed. And then there's a certain mindset that attorneys who don't succeed adopt. And I will tell you that the majority of attorneys out there, even law students, adopt kind of the wrong perspective on their careers, basically thinking about their careers in the wrong way. That makes you not succeed, it makes you unhappy, and it creates all sorts of issues that can affect your long-term success as a lawyer. Just to start off, my career has always been about placing people in law firms. And in order to succeed in a law firm and to have a very good career in a law firm, you need to think about your career in a certain way. And most people don't do that. They don't have good models for doing that because they may associate with other attorneys that are unhappy or not doing well. They don't have good models for doing that because often they go to law schools where this type of thinking is not emphasized. When you go to a good law school, and I'll talk a little bit about this, you're typically going to be surrounded by people that have a certain perspective. It's the same thing with really good colleges. People that go to these colleges and go to these good law schools are surrounded by others that think in a certain way, are motivated in a certain way. And that's really the advantage of going to top law schools, top colleges, and even working in the best firms. It's how you think about your career. It's the people you surround yourself with. And so in terms of going to Stanford or Harvard or wherever you go to law school, the main advantage is not what you learn. It's about the people that you're surrounded by and that they have high expectations for themselves, and they've always done very well. One other point I'll just bring up real quickly is people that have parents that are attorneys often succeed at a very high level practicing law. The more successful their parents are as attorneys, the more successful they are. A lot of that comes down to the fact that they have models. They know how their parents work. Parents help them think about practicing law in a law firm in a certain way, and they do very well. Also, just a quick, kind of promo for law firms is there's really no other job that you can get into where you can have as long as a career as attorneys do in law firms. Attorneys will start their jobs in law firms and they will often be there for decades. I mean, you can practice in a law firm into your 80s, but you have to think about your career in a certain way. You can make millions of dollars as an attorney, regardless of where you went to law school, if you think about your career in a certain way. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you about what successful people do. I'm going to talk to you about how you can be successful, regardless of your background, based all on how you think about your career, regardless of where you went to law school. And even if you did go to a really good law school and you're at a really big firm, the way you think about your career is just incredibly important. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So many attorneys, a lot of them, they're dissatisfied. They feel burnt out by their careers. They feel, that they're, not doing as well. But in many cases, the problem is not really with the profession. It's based on how you think about it. So I'm going to talk to you today about many of the traditional narratives that people have about practicing law and in law firms. And I'm going to tell you how you can identify and how you can adopt a mindset that's going to make you much more effective. I've been in the self-improvement industry. I'm not in it anymore, but I used to, be very close with Anthony Robbins and other motivational people. And really what they teach, I'm going to teach you how to approach your career and how to think about these things in the same way that people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars going to seminars and learning about self-improvement and reading self-improvement books. And I'm really just going to teach you that mindset about how people take that information and become incredibly successful. And there are countless billionaires and other people that have taken their careers to a whole new level and their lives to a whole new level based on how they think about things. And so you need to think about your career. You need to think about practicing law in a certain way. And if you do that, you're going to be incredibly successful. You can have a career if you're 25 that lasts another 60 years. You can make, if you want to make $1 million a year, you can make $1 million a year. If you want to make $3 million a year, you can make $3 million a year, but it's all based on how you think. And that's what I'm going to try to do today, is really get you into that mindset so you can understand the kind of people that are successful, the kind of people that aren't, how you need to think about things. And it's all based on how you think about things. That's what makes people successful. It has nothing to do, if you have the ability to pass the bar, you can be very, very successful practicing law, and you can have a good and fulfilling career. So just a quick story. My daughter was 4. She started attending a small preschool run out of a rental house of this aging hippie couple in Malibu, California. If you're not from California, or even this kind of suburbs of Los Angeles, a lot of preschools are run out of houses. And there were more established preschools from this, but this school was a place where like a lot of movie stars and things sent their kids, because it was in a neighborhood where they were. And I think people were really thought it was good because of that. So you'd see like, Julia Roberts and all these different rock stars and other celebrities, from Matthew McConaughey. And when you would go there, which is kind of fun to meet those kind of people. They'd be at like events, with the cocktail parties and things. But the couple that was running this preschool were pretty off. The interior of the preschool, it smelled like marijuana. Then it also smelled like sage, which I think they burned every day, and incense. Inside the kitchen, it was stacked, like all the counters with vitamins and powders and all these things. And then if you talk to this couple, they were very, very opinionated about things. You might say something about asking them about their vitamins, and then they would launch into this, monologue about how bad mainstream medicine was. And then they would even try to sell you vitamins, which is kind of crazy if you're in a preschool. And they believe things like that the government was poisoning people. They would point up into the sky and see these were chemtrails that are keeping people, trying to control population by making people fertile. They had all these conspiracy theories. They had very little furniture. They had cushions like around the house that they would sit on that were covered with South American quilts. And I mean, you can kind of get the idea based on what I'm saying. But the couples that were sending, people that were sending there, didn't really care. But these people were just completely out of it. They would talk about astrology. If someone mentioned their child was moody, they would say it's because of their star sign. And instead of addressing things like the kid may have been tired from not sleeping enough. There was a couple, the male drove early 19 era's van that had shag carpeting on the floors, on the roof, on the sides, and inside. There was a bed in the van, and then when you'd see this guy driving around, he would be in the slow lane and driving like 35, 40 miles an hour, and Pacific Coast Highway where everyone's going like 60 or 70 miles an hour. There were stickers on the back of the van, about various social causes and expressing hate for Republicans. The van would start up and it was very smoky. It was blowing smoke down the road. The guy had a tie-dye clothing, too much facial hair. And and then after my daughter left the school, this guy ended up cutting someone off at a canyon road. I don't know how he did that, and the person just plunged off this canyon and died. And then he subsequently, after that, he disappeared. His wife didn't know where he was. And, it's just, not good. So the school somehow ran out of money. It wasn't cheap. But in December of that year, the, woman wanted people to make large donations. And she said if they did, they would give her prepay their tuition, and then she would give them a 50% discount. So, the tuition in a school like this might be, $15,000 a year, was a lot. So she was saying, if you paid your last 2 payments of 10,000, we would give you do it for 5,000. And there were just, a lot of financial things going on, people giving her money. And, and then the reason for this was apparently they had a outside structure on their property that they had built. So they basically had built a classroom in Malibu. What happens is they fly drones, they do all these things to see if anybody's putting illegal structures on their property. It's a very difficult place to do illegal construction. And then, she asked me for a loan of 200,000, and I found out later that she didn't even own the property. She had rented it out. So she was asking people for money. So, the preschool in its last few months, they had a benefit concert, and it was one of the parents there was this guy named Jonathan Davis, who was a singer of this kind of metal type, very interesting band called Korn. He was married to a porn star, this woman named Devin Davis. She ultimately died at 39 of a drug overdose. And then during this concert, she got on the stage and demanded the woman who ran the preschool to join her. When she got on the stage, she called the aging hippie woman a bitch and said, we need to give this bitch money, and so they could do well. And then it was funny because I was in this audience, and it was, she's swearing and everything and calling this woman a bitch. I mean, in a way that wasn't hostile, but everyone seemed to think it was normal to do this. And so, a few weeks after this, one of the female parents at the preschool went, woman who had a child there, filed charges against this porn star because she was stalking her, like a peeping Tom, like here in her windows. Preschool was absolutely crazy. And then a few months later, the preschool just suddenly closed without any notice. The people moved out, and then that happened. But shortly before the end of this, they disappeared. They held a march on Greenpeace Day. I took my daughter there on a Saturday. Believe me, this will all make sense in a few minutes. But I took my daughter there on a Saturday morning, and the parents stood in the backyard, and they gave them signs to march around saying things like big corporations are evil, stop killing our environment. And then she had all the children chanting. I mean, these were like 4 and 5 year old children and 6 year olds, screaming corporate America is killing us. So, again, no one seemed to care. It was just kind of like normal. I guess it was very liberal, but making these statements by 3, 4, and 5 year old children, was very, but what was going on, of course, is they were at a very young age were being indoctrinated into this narrative where they were told that big corporations were evil and killing the world. And parents there, very liberal movie stars and stuff that tend to be very left wing, seem to share these beliefs. So these are narratives, and narratives are, something important. My daughter had gotten that early, you know, indoctrination into this way of thinking and seemed to think that companies were bad, and was even told about avoiding certain foods and things. And all this stuff came from the school that a young person learned, that this was the way to think about things. And so she had gone there between, when she was 3, and had been fed this information constantly by the school. And, even when she got to the point where she was like 12 or 13 years old, she still thought that way. She didn't have any basis to really think differently. And this is what happens when people are indoctrinated into certain types of information and see the world in a certain way. I grew up in a suburb outside Detroit, and they were very concerned in the school district about people using drugs. It was just a big, in the 80s, they had Nancy Reagan on a march against drugs. The school did that. And so several times a year, even from the time I was like 5 or 6, they would have these assemblies where people would get up and talk about how bad drugs were. They would have people come into the class and talk when I was young. And I didn't know what any of this was, but it scared the hell out of me. And, I've never used drugs. I was put into this idea that if you use drugs, they're going to kill you, that it's going to fry your mind, you're going to be a bad student, which of course isn't true. But this was something that I was taught at a very young age, and I still avoid drugs just because I have, instinctively, because of what I was taught, think they're bad. So, there's narratives that people develop. It could be about hating large corporations. It could be about being a Republican. It could be about not being liberal. It could be about mainstream medicine. And you may not think all these things, but you're probably either a moderate, but you might be a Republican and hate and think Democrats are bad. You could be an Israeli and hate Palestinians, or a Palestinian and hate Israelis, people have all these narratives about the way they see the world, and it affects what happens to them. Like when I go out on, dates because I'm single, and I will meet people that will sit down and they will tell me that the world is coming to an end, and everything's horrible because, Trump is in power. And then I'll meet other people and they will be the exact opposite. So people have these narratives about how they think about the world, how they think about politics, how they think about medicine, how they think about all these different things. And it's also, relevant to your career. And, people take these narratives and, it can give them a way to think about the world. And so communists and people that are educated, people that are not educated, people about the environment, all these things, people take sides. And when they take sides on things, that is something that they believe in and that makes them feel part of something. And then they adopt a view that's important to us. And some people don't adopt views, they just become apathetic. They don't have any desire to take sides. And people that are like that often don't have any passion for anything, nothing that is, motivating them. And people that are very depressed will often just feel that nothing's good, and they won't feel hope. Sometimes they will, result to getting addicted to substances. They will have massive anxiety and take drugs for it. And they, don't have a compelling narrative about what they can achieve, about what the world offers them, about, changing themselves. And, so in order for you to be happy, you don't, if you have issues with addiction or anxiety or depression, you probably have a narrative of the world that the world is not welcoming to you, that there's something wrong with you, that you keep getting this negative feedback. People that are from families where there's a lot of addiction tend to become addicted. Families that are where people are depressed tend to become depressed. All these things create narratives. Your parents give you narratives, your schools give you narratives, the people you surround with you give you narratives. And most people have all these different narratives. They have narratives about their bodies and fitness and weight. They have narratives about how smart they are and what they can achieve. They have narratives about different clubs and things they belong to. And these narratives that you develop will often end up determining exactly what happens with your life. And you're constantly developing new narratives. Your narratives may be that you don't like law firms. Your narratives may be that the work is pointless in a law firm. Your narratives may be that this is the best possible career you could have. And you're seeing people succeed and you have all this future and you really enjoy what you're doing. And you're someone that's going to bring in clients and you're someone that's doing all these things. But unless you develop these positive narratives about your career and about your life, you're never going to move anything forward. Anthony Robbins, there's a great book called Unlimited Power, where he talks about some guy that was riding along in his motorcycle and had this horrible accident and flew under a truck and his whole body was burned and he just, he was handicapped and everything. And he developed a very positive narrative for his world. He didn't let that stuff hold him back. And he ended up marrying a very beautiful woman, running for Congress, and all these different things because he developed a positive narrative for himself. And this is what people do that become successful. There's no difference between you and millions of people that make hundreds of millions of dollars. There's no difference. If you pass the bar, these are all things you can do, but you're not going to do it unless you have a narrative for yourself that enables you to empower yourself and think that you can reach these things and find people that you can learn from and surround yourself with people that are going to build you up and not take you down. I mean, who are your friends? Are your friends people that are succeeding and going places and enthusiastic about the world, that things keep getting better and better for them and you're learning from them and you're seeing that? Are you surrounding yourself with other people that are successful? Are you, one of the things that's very popular that people have become very successful doing is they read biographies. When I was a young attorney, I read biographies of successful attorneys, Gary Spence, whoever. I would read these biographies. I read a book about big personal injury attorneys written by Katie Couric. I mean, I did everything I could to surround myself with positive information. I read Anthony Robbins. I read Napoleon Hill. I read all these motivational books that helped me develop a way of thinking about the world that was different than the people that I was surrounded by. I wanted to develop a narrative that was even more positive, that was better than the people around me, that enabled me to reach great heights, even with things that were holding me back, to get jobs in the very, very best law firms, even though I may not have had the highest grades, to get into the best law schools, even though I may not have done as well as the LSATs as I wanted to get the best grades, even though I was at schools where people were much smarter than me. All these things were narratives, and the narratives that I developed made me successful. They still make me successful. I develop narratives on my own. I have a narrative about what I'm doing right now and about my career and changing people and the power of it and how I can do it. All these sorts of things are narratives. Most recruiters just sit around, and their narrative is they're going to make as much money as possible making placements, and that's it. They don't have a narrative that they're changing lives and helping people grow, and they have the power to do this, and they're going to get out there and make a difference. They don't have those kind of narratives, and most people don't. Most people don't have narratives that are positive. Probably the odds are pretty good in the whatever law firm you're working in or whatever jobs you've had. And for the most part, you're not surrounded by people with the strongest narratives. If you go to one of the highest paying law firms in the country, where there's partners making millions of dollars a year, those people have risen to those heights by having positive narratives about their careers, by believing if they work hard, they would do well, but believing if they brought in business, they would do well, believing that they could do it by watching what other people are doing, and they become at the very, very top of their career. It's usually not the people in the biggest law firms, it's people that are very smart, but it's people that have a narrative about what they can achieve and what they can do and how they can do it despite the odds that, out of a starting class of 50, first year associates in a law firm, they can be the one or two that make partner and go far, where other people are just dropping out of the race and think, oh, I never want to do this. I want to go in house. I don't want to work as hard. I don't like the way that I don't admire the lifestyle of these very successful attorneys that probably have multiple houses, vacation houses, millions of dollars in the bank, families that go to the best schools, all these things. They don't develop those kind of narratives. And because they don't develop those kind of narratives, they have these careers that go nowhere. Most people are not living up to their full potential. Most people are not getting anywhere near the success they want in life, whether it's personal, professional, their health, whatever it is. They just don't have these positive narratives. You look at any aspect of your life. Are you unfit? That's a narrative. Are you not making as much money as you could and think you're stuck? That's a narrative. Do you not believe that working in a law firm is a great career? That's a narrative. Do you believe that nothing positive is ever going to happen to you and you're stuck in this position? That's a narrative. Do you believe that no one's going to hire you because there's something wrong with you? That's a narrative. Do you believe that you're never going to work in a large law firm because you didn't go to a good enough school? That's a narrative. Why would you develop a narrative that says you're never going to be successful in the practice of law because you didn't go to the top law school? Why on earth would somebody do something like that? But that's exactly what people do. They have all these negative narratives. Most people do. And I'm going to show you today how to change that. But the odds are very, very good that you're stuck with a poor narrative about whatever it is, about your personal life, about anything. You have stuck in a bad marriage, whatever. People have these negative narratives. So you need to surround yourself with positive narratives and things that are, very, very good for you, that are going to help you change and help you be, a really good person. I was talking to one of our recruiters not too long ago, and the recruiter was saying how impressed, she was with one of her candidates. The candidate had gone to a poor high school near her, and she was amazed that this person could come out of this negative environment, go to a great college and law school, and then a law firm. Even the high school you went to, you're surrounded by certain types of people. I grew up in the Detroit area and was very interested in like people that went to these Detroit schools because nothing really good ever happened to them. All right. They would go to these schools and they would drop out, or they would get into drugs or crime and all these things. They're just surrounded by people that were like that. And that made them not reach their full potential. So this girl was just amazed by this person. I asked why she was amazed, and she said that, no one from the school that, she knew about, does well. Most of them, will drop out of high school and not even finish. A lot of people do well in high school and then they go to college and don't do well. They don't make it. And, I will bring up some things that may be a little uncomfortable to people, but, a lot of times people from different racial or different ethnic backgrounds will not do well. They will believe that people from their race can't succeed, and and then, in big law firms, and they will fail. There are people that, have narratives where they're developed by by their parents, where they need to do extremely well, where that's how they need to think about things. It's just amazing. Like, I used to live in this city called San Marino, which is right next to Pasadena, California, which is a suburb outside Detroit. But San Marino was then, still is, has a lot of families from Taiwan. And I was living in this kind of small house next to another small house. And I used to hear this woman like yelling in Chinese every night. And she'd moved over from Taiwan. The husband was still in Taiwan. They rented this house and they were sending their kids to San Marino schools, which is one of the best schools, best school systems in California. It's just a very, very good school. And she'd yell at them every night. And then I had this other woman that was, Chinese, living on the other side of me. And, one day I said to her, what is this woman yelling about? And she said, she's yelling at her kids that, if they don't get the best grades, if they don't study harder, they're going to be failures, and they need to really apply themselves. And just, why aren't they studying? Why are they, distracted? All these sorts of things, just yelling at these kids every night. And just think about the kind of narrative it develops. If you don't get the absolute best grades possible, you're going to have you're going to be a failure in life. If you don't do all these things, nothing good's ever going to happen to you. Developing this narrative. And kids that go to those schools, I mean, I used to do missions for the University of Chicago, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, they were, getting these incredibly high scores in the SATs, just great grades, like, 10 APs by the time they're, in seniors. I mean, it's all these major things because the parents were, developing narratives. But, if people are in an environment where they're not likely to succeed because they may be around other students that aren't doing well, they might be around, parents that aren't doing well. They're getting kind of all these negative messages about what's possible. They're not developing this. So this woman, was very impressed by this recruiter, very impressed by this woman that had come out of a, not so good of a school, because no one succeeded from it. There's all this, negative feedback. The environment wasn't good. The teachers weren't good. The people that they were around weren't good. The parents didn't have money and didn't think about things. It was blue collar, and, so maybe not even working. I mean, so, the idea here is that, you could go to, it doesn't really matter where you get your education. You could go to, community college, and you're going to learn, you can take calculus, you can take all these different classes, and you'll learn the same things that you would learn at Stanford. But the narrative that you're going to get when you go to Stanford is a much better narrative because you're surrounded by people. The school believes in you. You believe in yourself because you're going to the school, and so you're going to get a much better narrative of your future and what you're capable of achieving. Because of the people you're around. When I went to the University of Chicago, my parents weren't lawyers. They weren't particularly successful, but I got there, and all these people wanted to go to business school and work in investment banks and wanted to go to law school, and that's all they talked about. And they talked about what you needed to do to succeed. They are motivated and studying and all these sorts of things. Now, not everybody was like that, of course, but suddenly I was around all these people that had all these huge goals for themselves. And I never would have gone to University of Virginia Law School. I never would have become an attorney. I probably would have done something, had an asphalt business. I probably would have fallen back on that because I was a good living. But, I just, being surrounded by this narrative changed me, and it made me more successful. It made me understand what I needed to do. It made me understand the type of law schools I could go to. It made me understand what was possible if you applied yourself in college and did well. It made me understand, how much money you could make in a law firm. It made me understand how great law school could lead to politics and all these things. And so I developed a narrative just by going to that school and by being around people that had those narratives, whether it was in my fraternity or the classes I took and all these sorts of things. So if you surround yourself with people like that, you're going to be more successful than if you're not. I never would have been doing what I'm doing had I not gone to University of Chicago and been surrounded by those people. And, you may have gone to college and been surrounded by positive people, or you may have been surrounded by negative people that thought it's just fine to go to a fourth-tier law school. You're going to become an attorney. But if but you surround yourself with people that have these positive narratives, and it's going to make a difference. It will make a difference when you're young. It'll make a difference when you're old. It'll make a difference when you're thinking about the kind of law firms and success you want to have. And they're going to define you, and they're literally going to, in most cases, determine the course of your life. So, what are you doing to develop a positive narrative? So, if you have a, strong opinion about yourself and what you can achieve, and you're surrounded by other people that think that way, you're going to do better. And if you have negative narratives about yourself and negative people you're surrounded with that have negative views about things, people that don't want to succeed, if you're not, cramming your mind with positive things, then you're not going to get anywhere near what you can achieve. One of the most successful attorneys that I ever, that I know that I worked with and coached at one point, he was amazing. He went to, I think, Berkeley. He didn't do particularly well there. He didn't get a good job as a summer associate. He didn't get an offer. He failed the bar, all these sorts of things. But he decided he was going to pick himself up, and he started listening to self-improvement books all the time. He would listen to them at work when he was doing document review. He was setting all these goals for himself and believing in himself and thinking he could get clients and all these things when other people won't. He just changed his whole narrative. Now he's a partner at one of the top 5 law firms and in the United States for litigation. It's just amazing how he changed his life around with a narrative. He read my stuff. He said that helped him tremendously. Reading my blog where I create all these positive narratives for people to read, which is harrisonbarnes.com. He did that. He read all my articles on BCG about how to think about his career, and he adopted those and all these things, and he developed a positive narrative. You're doing that right now. You're listening to something that's going to help you develop a positive narrative. And because you're listening to this and you're paying attention and you're setting time aside to try to become a better person and learn how to think about your career, you're developing a positive narrative. And that's something very few people do. We have a lot of people showing up to these webinars, but we certainly don't have, we might have 1,000 people, but we certainly don't have 10,000 people. And that's, not even half of 1% of the attorney population, because most people are not interested in changing. Most people aren't interested in improving themselves. Most people aren't interested, in a positive narrative. And if you want to be happy, anybody can be happy. You just have to think about the world in a certain way. You have to, not think negative things, and you have to think about how other people think about things that have positive narratives. People are happy, by the way. It's interesting when you could tell them all this negative information, complain about people and complain, but they won't even engage with you. They'll just kind of, and a lot of people, one of the happiest guys I know, if someone walks up and starts talking negative things about him, he just excuses himself and walks away. He doesn't want to hear it. So here's how negative narratives can define your legal career. It's very important what you're listening to right now. So, whatever you're doing, the entire point is to surround yourself with, get into firms where there's a positive narrative, surround yourself with coworkers that have a positive narrative, surround yourself with people outside of work and in work and, significant others that have a positive narrative. And if you do that, you're going to, do well. I mean, this is how people succeed. They don't succeed by being around people or being in organizations and things that are dragging them down. And the best law firms, they have different beliefs about what they're capable of. The narrative is you have to do very, very good work. The narrative is you have to work hard. There's certain things that are acceptable in certain firms and not others. The narrative of the people there is we're doing the best possible work we can. We're working certain hours. We're working, we're going to be successful. And all these things are acceptable. If you go to a poor law firm, the narrative is not going to be often to produce the best work. It's going to be get as done as possible, quickly as possible. It's not going to be, to produce work that's flawless. It's just all these different things. And so, you currently have a narrative, whatever you're doing. I mean, you might be in a law firm, you might be in-house, you might have had multiple jobs, you might be unemployed, but there's just all these different narratives. And inside a lot of large law firms, the narrative is you're going to do well here, you're going to work as hard as you possibly can, and then you're going to go in house and where you're going to have fewer hours and be happy. Why does that narrative exist in large law firms? The narrative exists in large law firms because the partners don't want to make a lot of partners because it's going to influence how much they make. So they'll make partners if you can make them a hell of a lot of money. If you bring in $5 million in business, maybe they'll pay you $1.5 million. and keep 3.5 million. So they don't care if you goes to the partnership and overhead and things. So there's a narrative that you can adopt that you're going to be that kind of person. But most people in large law firms will develop a narrative that they're going to go in house, have few hours, and be happy. Well, that narrative, by the way, that narrative is something that law firms have because and partners, because they want you to go in house because you're going to refer business to them. The first law firm to pay attorneys a lot of money, the first law firm to not have a lot of partnership opportunities was Cravath, Swaine and Moore. They would work people, they would pay the highest salaries, always have, and then hardly anybody would make partner. It's always been that way. And then they would send their people that weren't making partner into in-house jobs and hope that those people refer business to them. So large law firms would and still do a promoter narrative that you're going to work there and then hopefully you'll go in-house and refer them business. That is not a narrative that's going to serve you well in your career. And this is what most people do. They think, oh, this is the best course for my career is going in-house. But that you just realize that that narrative is being promoted inside the law firm. The law firm wants that narrative because they want you to be in a position where you're giving them business. And so, the other narratives with associates and even partners, working in a large law firm is unpleasant. It's too stressful. It's not a great environment. And people will often develop the narrative about how bad law firms are and the hours and the things right when they're in law school, and then they'll quickly develop a negative narrative when they get into law firms. And what does this narrative do for you? It just makes you not be part of, top 5% of people that do the best. It makes them not fully committed and always looking for something else. And puts them in a position where they're never going to reach their full potential as an attorney because they have adopted this narrative. And the people that succeed, don't succeed. It's very interesting because in a lot of cases they might have done very well in college or high school and got into these great law schools and they had this narrative about what's possible and what they can do. And then suddenly they get into these great places as an attorney or these jobs, and suddenly they start having this negative narrative. So this negative narrative, by the way, is not something, you may have had a positive narrative when you were in college about what was possible. You might have had a positive narrative even in law school about what was possible. But then at some point along the way, you decide you're going to develop a negative narrative. This is what happens to most people, by the way. Most people will develop this negative narrative at some point. They will manage to not develop the negative narrative for a large part of their college or law school careers. They may even have a positive narrative when they get into law school, law firm jobs. They might even keep the positive narrative for 3 or 4 years. They might even keep it for 10 years, but then at some point they become defeated. I didn't get business. I lost my job. There's no opportunities. No one wants to hire someone old like me. So they literally might, by the time they're 35 or by the time they're 30, they still have a positive narrative, but then by the time they're 35 or 37 or whatever, their narrative is negative. And I see this all the time. I knew one guy that became a partner at White and Case, and then he was there for a couple of years, and they start you out as kind of a non-equity partner, never developed any business, lost his job, developed this horrible narrative about the legal career, ended up actually becoming a recruiter at our company, developed a negative narrative about that, then went in house, developed a negative narrative about that, and then ended up starting his own practice. Negative narratives about working in house, negative narratives about working in law firms, all these sorts of things. Ended up getting divorced. You will, if you are a man and you get married when you're young, the narrative is, I'm going to be a very successful lawyer. You might make a lot of money for a long time, and then suddenly everything stops. You develop this horrible narrative when you lose jobs or when you don't advance, and a lot of guys get divorced. It's just, I see it all the time. They come from this very positive narrative and then suddenly they stop succeeding. So how do you succeed as an attorney, and how do you succeed in your life? How do you become what you're capable of? How do you escape, all this negative things? And, so you need to, avoid these negative narratives. You need to avoid being around people that say things like, working hard is not worth it, where there's no future, where you're not going to succeed, where it's impossible, where everyone in this law firm, it's just the morale is low. I mean, I see people all the time that go into these law firms that might have been in existence for 120 years, and they get in there and they're couple years in, and they say, oh, the morale's really low, no one's happy, this law firm, it's just a horrible place. And yet, they people were saying the same things about the same law firms 30 years ago, because they just, the narrative's always going to be negative in a lot of law firms. I mean, but there's people that manage to escape that narrative, and they're motivated and they think about what's possible. And those are the people that succeed. So any law firm you're in, I mean, there's going to be negative narratives. There'll be people that have negative narratives. Often the people that have negative narratives, by the way, are the people that aren't doing the best work, that don't get along with others, that aren't committed, that have their own problems. Sometimes people have even psychological problems that will help them make them develop those narratives. So anytime you try to rise somewhere, others are going to try to define you with these negative narratives, and you either have to adopt those narratives or you have to fight against them. Think about successful politicians, think about successful athletes, think about anybody that's successful in any profession. I mean, think about Donald Trump. I mean, how many people have all these horrible narratives about him? How many people is he surrounded by that have negative narratives of how many people try to push him down and say all these negative things about him, whether it's Jeffrey Epstein or, I don't know, what is it, Epstein, or I don't know, regardless. I mean, he's surrounded by a world and by people, by even his own staff, by Elon Musk, all these people that want him, that have these negative narratives about him. What is his choice? Is his choice to adopt those and say, oh, these people say these horrible things about me, it must be true? Or is he someone that doesn't listen to that and just keeps pushing forward? Think about that. Just think about any time you pick up any newspaper, watch any television show, people are trying to define him with all these negative things. Now, I'm not saying I'm on one side of political spectrum or other, but just think about that. I mean, how could he fall into that negative narrative about himself and just feel badly about himself and feel like he can't get anything done? But the most successful politicians and other people are surrounded by people that want to give them negative narratives about themselves. It's just how it works. And they can either decide how to adopt them or not. And so, if you need to be happy, if you want to be happy, if you want to be successful, you just can't surround yourself with these negative narratives. You have to avoid people that are trying to give you negative narratives about yourself. People that are trying to give you negative narratives about themselves, often they will feel threatened by your success. They will be jealous. They will not, they will think that if you're successful, there's something wrong with them. Families do this. I mean, families will tell, their children and things that that nothing's possible, that there's all these negative things about you, that you have all these problems. You'll have friends that do that. You'll have people around you that will do that. You'll have in law firms, you'll have, other associates that will try to make you feel badly about yourself. Partners have people surrounding themselves that are telling them they're not good enough and things. Anybody that's successful is always going to be surrounded by, people, that have narratives. And, if I hadn't lived in Malibu, and if it was in a very conservative part of the country, this narrative about being a complete hippie and all these things disorganized and problems, people in a conservative neighborhood would not even send their kids to that school. They would think it's insane. But people there had a certain narrative, and so no one would send their kids to that school. People would think these people are just absolutely, crazy. I mean, that would not work in rural Utah. It wouldn't work in, all these different areas. But people would have been complete. These people would be complete outcasts. But with that narrative, and not there. So when this Devin Davis, the porn star of the corn singer, got up and was speaking all this highly offensive language, that was in a conservative area of the country, people would have just gotten up and walked out. They probably wouldn't even attend a concert like that, or it was a porn star, it would have been complete ostracism. All these being involved in the film industry would not have made her successful there. It's just a bad narrative. And so people have all sorts of narratives, and People will, surround themselves, will have different narratives in different parts of the world. If you live in a Muslim country, they're going to have very strong narratives about probably Israel and about non-Muslims and all these sorts of things. Different ethnic groups have different narratives, different religions have different narratives, and it defines people. And, the narrative of an attorney in a large law firm, a very big, successful law firm in New York City, is going to have a completely different narrative that they're buying into and the way they think about the world and the way they think about the profession than an attorney that might be working in a mid-sized law firm in Omaha, Nebraska. The people that the attorneys surrounded with in Oklahoma and Omaha, Nebraska are going to be a completely different type of person than an attorney than the one in Omaha, Nebraska. It could even boil down to your practice area. The kind of people you're around your practice area are going to define your narrative about what you're doing. And every, law firm you could be in is going to have, different narratives. So how do you listen to the right narratives, in your law firm and in your career and wherever you're working? I was talking to, another, attorney, a recruiter from our firm, and she was working with this person and talked about how their LinkedIn profile said something like they were a recovering attorney who took some time off to write a book, and this person was looking for a job. A narrative that you're a recovering attorney is not going to, to get you a job. It's just not going to happen. There was one woman, I've talked about this before in another webinar, but I was working with this guy that was moving from this kind of mid-sized law firm to a better law firm, like an AmLaw, not AmLaw 100, but AmLaw 200 law firm. He was taking, he was going with some partners and some associates. And so this larger law firm looked at, I don't know, Facebook or whatever, of one of these associates, like this woman that was like an 8th or 9th year associate that was coming over with all these partners that she'd worked with for a lot of her career, and people that had protected her and had a future for her. If she came over to this other firm, would have, they had a lot of business, so they would be able to make her a partner. And one of these this firm that they were all going over to looked at her social media profile, and it said something like, I hate this career, but I'm doing it for the money, and getting all these thumbs up and everything. And the law firm saw that, and it's like, this is a negative narrative she has. And the law firm ended up not hiring her. And suddenly, her career, there's how far she could go was completely limited because they saw someone that had the wrong narrative. And she didn't move over those people. She ended up losing her job and literally did something like become a yoga teacher because she wasn't able to get another job. She was too senior. She, didn't have, no reason to hire her. I mean, there's all these problems. And so just because of that negative narrative that people saw, her career stopped. And, this attorney that says they're a recovering attorney is never going to get a job. Why would you hire someone that has a LinkedIn profile that says they're a recovering attorney? A negative, why would you do that if you're a law firm? Would you want to hire someone that's motivated and has possibility and wants to advance? Or would you hire someone that has a negative narrative? And, I, it's interesting to me, like, I every day BCG gets, hundreds of people submitting the resume. And I always, every resume that comes in, I always personally review them. I've always done it. It takes me at least a couple hours a day, but I want to make sure that the company is working with the right people. And I want to make sure that I find people that even if they don't have the best backgrounds that I know can succeed, and then the company can put all the resources into helping them. I love doing it. It's my job. But I'll always, every day I'll see these attorneys that, went to, good colleges, they got master's degrees and things, but they would be like something like the classics or, the, well, I don't know, history and things like all these things. And when you look at people that went to Yale, it's, usually like just very like interesting, like classic studies and, the philosophy and like, all these things. But I'll see these attorneys all the time, frequently. And a lot of these people become corporate attorneys. And think about that. I mean, being a corporate attorney is completely different than being a litigator where you're writing and reading and making arguments just like someone that learned philosophy would do. And I when I was practicing, I did a little bit of corporate law, I mean, for 6 months, when I was in another firm. And it's completely different than litigation or anything where you would kind of think about reading cases and things. It's basically like, in my experience, it's, you have to be very detail oriented. You're looking at these documents and things and filing them and putting them together in different orders. And, it's like being a super talented clerk a lot of times. It's not like writing, but it's the same thing, being a litigator, like a lot of these people. I mean, the guy next to me in this New York firm was a real estate attorney, went to Stanford, and it's just nothing like that. It's a complete different use of your skills in your mind than being like, a litigator or something. So think about that. Like, how could someone that, did so well, that, just became incredibly talented and got these great grades, doing things like writing or studying classics or philosophy, how could they go into being like a corporate, a real estate attorney or risk attorney? How could they do something like that when it doesn't seem like it's something that they would enjoy, because it's more clerical than the other things? And what these people do is they become successful, and they find the ability to think, this is what I like to do. This is where my future is. I'm doing, I like this work. I can be good at it. And so they develop these narratives, even though, they went to, University of Chicago Law School and have, I mean, it's just, they have these different narratives. And so, even though they're interested in writing, even though they're interested in thinking about things in a philosophical point of view, they're able to go into these law firms and get these jobs, and they find purpose, and they construct something around saying, I'm going to be good at doing capital markets or corporate or security. I mean, secure, M&A and all these things. And they don't construct a narrative that says, hey, this isn't the kind of stuff I love. This is, different. They are able to construct a positive narrative about this stuff, about this is really good work. This is exciting to me. There's all these future, and they learn to love and appreciate that, because they know that success will only come through thinking about these things in a positive way. And maybe that's what made them so successful and get into, whatever law school and done there. They find meaning in something where a lot of people would say, I don't like this. I'd rather be writing and things. And they don't do that. And they develop positive narratives, and they become, very successful corporate attorneys or whatever, real estate attorneys, where they do that their entire career. And, and they do that because they're able to construct positive narratives. Their narratives will go beyond, just doing the work. They'll talk about how much they like the work. They'll talk about how much they, enjoy the challenge, how much they're learning. And, and this is what a lot of very successful people do. I want you to think about this, because this is what people do. And the people that are successful, they go to these, really good law schools, or they, do all these things that you would think where they'd want to do one type of thing, but they go into things that may not actually, make use of their immediate interest and success. And they create a narrative about how they enjoy it, how they're learning, how there's all this possibility doing this kind of work, how all these positive things. And then they develop these awesome narratives that enable them to go so far in their careers. And, the people that are least successful, like if you're not succeeding right now at the level that you want to be, I want you to think about what these people do in the successful. I want you to think about, how you're thinking about your career. I want you to think about how you're thinking about your colleagues. I want you to think about how you think about law firms. I want you to think about all this kind of stuff, because, you don't need a narrative about how little you enjoy your work. You don't need a narrative about how bad law firms are. You don't need a narrative about how you want to get out of there and do something different. Just, if you want to be successful, you need to develop a positive narrative about everything. You need to have a positive narrative about not just your job, but the people you're working with, your possibilities, like what you're going to be able to do with these skills, how far you can rise. And but most people, a lot of people, lots of partners do this, lots of associates do this. They develop a negative narrative that they need to escape, that there's nothing positive about this, that they're not learning enough, that they don't like the people they're around. And, instead of something positive that's going to help them advance their careers and have better lives. And those same people will surround themselves with other attorneys that will go out to lunch and talk negatively. People will go into each other's offices and close the door and circulate rumors. They will do that. And by the way, In every law firm, the most successful law firms, here's what they do. People go in there, and there's people that have very positive narratives, and those people get repeat work from partners. People like them, they keep them around, and what every successful law firm does. I just want you to think about this because it's very, very important. What every successful law firm does is it's continually to keep the law firm running, to keep it successful, is continually pushing people out that have these negative narratives and opinions about them. They just keep pushing them out, and they keep the people around that are doing well, and then they interview and try how to hire people that have positive narratives. And that's what they do. Every law firm that's successful is watching to see who's part of the successful narrative and who's negative, and the people that are negative are just pushed out like a virus. That's what they do. That's how all successful organizations keep going. My company, when I have recruiters that have a negative narrative, I push them out like a virus. I don't want anything to do with them. They're affecting all the other people there. They're not positive, that they're just nothing good comes from having those people in the company because they drag it down. So those people are pushed out. And that's how every successful company operates. That's how every successful business operates. In order for them to push forward and do well, they need to push out people that have negative narratives. That's exactly what every organization's doing. So think about any successful organization you've ever been in. They're just pushing people out with negative narratives. That's exactly what they do. They keep the negative positive, they keep the clients happy, they push these people out. One of the things that and I talk about this a lot, but when I hire people, one of the most important things that I look for, and this is the same thing the law firms look for. When I hire someone, if someone's been at their previous job for 10 or more years, what happens to them is they come into our company, generally they stay. So they stay for 10 years. I have people that have worked for me for 25 years. I have people that come in, if I hire a recruiter that's been at their last job a year and before that another job a year, they will come in and usually they become negative and they infect other people and they're pushed out. And that's why they left out. That's why they were pushed out of their previous law firms. They were pushed out because they were negative and affected people. And when I see people that come into our company, they are surrounded by, obviously, I don't have everyone positive narratives. People with negative narratives will approach them and try to get them to buy into their way of thinking. And those people will just ignore it. People that are very successful and stay in law firms and stuff for a long time and jobs, they will come into any new job that they do, and they will just ignore all this and stick around and be successful. And that makes them succeed. That makes them do well. So, years ago, I was, practicing law at my second law firm. And there was this woman, she went to Stanford Law School, that she became my best friend. And she would come into my office and almost every day not every day, but frequently would come into my office, close the door, and, would share with me, all of these negative opinions. And at the time I was going to be like, okay, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to do well. I've moved law firms. I don't want to move again. And when she would do this, I would get very upset. And I didn't like it because I knew that if I bought into this, I would be unsuccessful and not do well. And so I knew that if I, stayed friends with her, I would be under constant pressure to stop thinking about things this way, to stop thinking about I can have a long-term career and be successful as an attorney. And she was mad at me. I would talk to her about, why this was a good place, why I liked my colleagues, and how much potential there was in things. And she would be like, okay, well, you'll eventually realize what a horrible place this is. And you just keep sharing this information. And I knew that if I wanted to succeed in that law firm, that I couldn't surround myself and be with people like that. Everyone in the law firm, knew that she didn't think, well about it and, the firm. And so I knew that if I wanted to succeed in that law firm, I needed to be around other attorneys who were successful and who were doing well and who were rising, who thought positively about the firm. And, eventually I was at that firm and I was surrounded by, and the law firm, by the way, ended up going out of business. This huge New York law firm. It's no longer Dewey Valentine, but eventually was overcome by being around people that had these negative narratives. And I ended up actually quitting the practice of law. I saw, partners not succeeding. I saw all this politics I didn't like. I thought that this was just a really, really negative job. And I ended up quitting the firm, and they told me, you can't quit. If you quit, it's going to be very hard for you to get another job. And so I started, they gave me, like, basically said, take the next 3 months and look for a job, which I did. And I started learning about recruiting and all these things. And I developed a very positive narrative for myself. Like, this is something, I'm very interested in. I can help other attorneys. But at this firm, I was surrounded by all these negative narratives that it just became too much for me. I no longer believed in being an attorney. I no longer believed, in working in a large law firm. And, prior to going to law school, and even during law school and after law school, I owned this asphalt business that gave me a very positive narrative of myself. Like, I can succeed. I can, develop something out of nothing. I can do all these things. And so, I, had a positive narrative for myself about what I could do. I could do things on my own. I could help people. When I had my asphalt business, by the way, it was not just for me to make money. It was something that I was very passionate about because I'd grown up in Detroit, actually taught a class, co-taught a class when I was at the University of Chicago about Detroit, how people had all these problems and how people could never rise. And I would hire people. I felt like I could help people doing all these things, like employing them and helping them get jobs and giving them self-confidence. And I did all this, and because I wanted to do something positive for people. That was my narrative. I could help people through businesses and things, and I could make others, rise and things where other people couldn't. And so, I decided, that that's what I wanted to do. And that was my narrative, that I could do all these things on my own because I'd done this asphalt business for, 8 or 9 years, and really felt positive that I could help people through businesses, and I knew how to do things, and I could be independent, and I didn't need to surround myself with negative people. And, different law schools, like I told you earlier, will, produce different types of narratives in the people. Like, it's very interesting, like Yale Law School, the negative there, the narrative is really, you need to go into public interest, or you need to, work for the government, or you need to teach law and all these things. Like, people from Yale Law School often look down on working in law firms. They believe that they have a different path in their life, and that they can do something with a greater impact on the world than working in a law firm. That's how, that's the narrative that school develops. So you see these resumes of people that come out of Yale Law School, and I see them, you know, several times a week, and most of them, don't spend a lot of time in law firms. They end up, or they don't even work in law firms. They do all these things, and I think maybe I'll go back to a law firm, but their whole narrative is basically anti-law firm. And they think academia is a better thing to do. I mean, they think that government is a better thing to do, or public interest. That's how they think about things. And different law schools do different things. Like, if you go to NYU, the narrative is, I need to work in a large law firm. It's not that's the main narrative. If you go to, Yale, it's different. If you that's how it works. I went to, University of Virginia Law School, and it's certainly not, it's not as intellectual as, a school like University of Chicago, or something like that. So I mean, it's a very good school, obviously, but it's different. And so people that go there are more likely to be drawn to large law firms and public service or academia, because that's the people they're surrounded by. And that's not everyone there, but there's a pattern of thinking and narratives that these, schools will give people. And law firms have narratives for what's possible, and families have narratives, religions have narratives, and countries have narratives. And these narratives will shape and influence you, whatever you do. What is your family's narrative for you? What is that positive? I remember my mom was talking about one of my relatives, that was married to this woman, and they were living in a small town. He was very talented and smart, but she wanted to stay in the small town. She had, all these narratives for him about what he should be doing with his life and his career. And she was just like, this being around this woman is just dragging him down. It's making him, not successful. These, even your significant other, your family could have narratives for you. Your religion may have a narrative for you. It's influencing you. And like I talked earlier, a lot of attorneys in large law firms believe they should go in house. And because of this narrative, They may spend years, looking for in-house jobs and they're never fully committed. And they're always believing in this narrative that something's going to be better for them if they do that, even though that narrative may not be self-serving, even though that narrative might not be good. I know several personal injury attorneys that are so successful, it just kind of blows my mind. When I say successful, I mean, they get these verdicts and things or settlements that are like tens of millions of dollars. And so, they may have like $100 million in the bank, and, they may have gone to these very poor law schools, never gotten a job, and then maybe got some job working, helping a personal injury attorney with things that, after a year of looking for a job. And then we're like, wait a minute, like, look what I can do. Like, these people are making incredible amounts of money and it doesn't look that hard to me. It's like all they're doing is marketing, settling these cases. This is literally what most personal injury work is, by the way. It's all about marketing, then you get the cases, and then you file lawsuits and just push them along until you settle and make a bunch of money. But this guy learned that. He's like, there's a couple guys I know learn that, and they're like, I can do this. I can become a successful personal injury attorney. I can make all this money. And suddenly these people, they live in like, $15 million houses and then take these exotic vacations. Some of them even have, the jets. I mean, they literally, I mean, and it's just incredible because they developed a narrative for themselves that they could be very, very successful doing something like that. People develop other narratives. I know a woman that's probably one of the top 5 immigration attorneys in the country. She went to Southwestern Law School. She'd been, very successful model, like just, like very successful. And she developed this narrative, I can do anything. She came from a small town in Canada, was discovered at some concert, became this big time model, and this narrative, I can do anything. And then during her one of her summers in law school, she worked for another immigration attorney, and she's like, this person is not reaching their full potential. There's all this other type of work they could be doing. They're taking these, cases that don't make a lot of money and stuff. So she graduated from this law school. She went there at night. She didn't do particularly well. She didn't have anything that would make her remotely qualified to work in a large law firm. She didn't have the intellectual skills to probably succeed in a large law firm, but she's this narrative like, I can do anything. Like, I became this, successful model, like this world big model. I did it with nothing. I pushed myself. I became more successful than other models. If I can do that, I can do anything. And then went to this immigration firm in the summer and was like, I want to be successful. This person is not making the best use of their skills. This person is not thinking about things in the right way. I can do better. And so she became an immigration attorney with no substantive experience in immigration law, but just a belief in herself that she could do anything and she could reach any goal that she set for herself, all these sorts of things. And now she's like a world-renowned immigration attorney doing these incredible things, like flying all over the world. And I mean, it's just freaking goddamn amazing. But it's all because of this narrative. Same thing with personal injury attorneys. I know, just nothing in their background that would suggest any type of ability to succeed practicing law, but they developed this narrative about what was possible and how I could learn all these things. Just like I developed a narrative for myself in this business, like I can do anything, I can succeed, I can do what other people aren't doing. I look at all these other recruiters and they're not helping people, they're just pushing people, through through the trying to get the best attorneys jobs and not thinking about all these things. People that go in house have this narrative that they need to work in house, and they develop that narrative, and that holds them back. And so what is the narrative that you're developing? Like, how are you thinking about your career? How are you thinking? Is your narrative, by the way, something that benefits other people? Like, going in house benefits law firms because they can get business from you and they don't have to make you a partner. Is that your narrative? Is your narrative that you can't succeed in law firms because you've seen other people fail? Do you believe in yourself? Are you surrounding yourself? Are you watching things like this and learning? Are you trying to develop something that's going to help you, that's going to help you be successful? Like, how are you thinking about all these things? Like, what do you believe? Like, how do you think about yourself? Are you developing narratives of your significant other? Are you developing narratives of the negative attorneys you're around? What are you doing? Are you seeking out people that are successful and learning from them? Are you learning narratives that help you, that make you a better person, that you think about things? People that are, there's a lot of people, I mean, a significant percentage of the population, I don't know what it is, but it's more than 10% are alcoholics. And most of them never escape that. They just continue drinking and having all these problems that come along with it, poor performance on their jobs, like, depression, like paranoia, like, bad relationships, like feeling, badly about how they acted at parties and things, like just this horrible, addiction in life that just affects them. And then they go and they spend all their time with other alcoholics. They all develop this kind of narrative about the world. And it doesn't mean that they can't be successful, but they're just not anywhere near reaching their potential because they're surrounded by other people that drink a lot. And so then, how do they get out of that? They go to, most of them don't, but the ones that do, they'll go to Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever, and they'll surround themselves with people that have overcome these addictions. They'll have a narrative about how it's possible, like what you need to do, like you need to, whatever, believe in a higher power, you need to believe you're helpless. I mean, whatever they do, they come up with a new narrative and it changes the direction of their lives. That's, what you need to do. You can't expect your life to change if you have just some simple narrative about yourself that you're not going to be successful. You can't expect your life to change if you're not surrounding yourself with other people that are successful. You can't expect your life to change if you're not doing the things like this extremely successful guy that rose after failing the bar and never getting a good summer associate to becoming a partner at one of the top 5 law firms in the world. I read the new, Wall Street Journal, and I mean, I see the guy's name mentioned about these huge cases like against Google and stuff. I mean, regularly. I mean, not all the time, but I mean, at least a couple times a year. Someone that's just risen from, nothing, but developed this positive narrative by listening to self-improvement books, by watching my webinars, by reading my articles and things, and by getting information from every top author he can, by admiring other attorneys at his firm and other firms that have become successful, this incredible narrative for himself that anything is possible. So these narratives you have are going to determine how successful you are practicing law. They're also going to determine how happy you are in your life. They're going to determine the type of mate you have. They're going to determine how much money you have. They're going to determine how, your kids will turn out. Certain people have really strong narratives about taking care of their kids and being a good father or mother and having a good family that's stable, and they admire other people that are doing that. And your narrative that you have is going to determine what happens to you. It's just everything is about this. It's not about how hard you work. It is, but it's not just about that. It's not about how smart you are. It's not about what you've done in the past. It's about developing a positive narrative now. Now, what do I mean now? Well, what I mean is, you could be 50 years old, but you still have 30 years left to practice law. You have time to develop a new narrative right now, regardless of what's happened to you. You can develop a new narrative. I see people like just incredible, like they might be never worked in a law firm. They worked in house and the government. And then suddenly, at the age 50, they decide this is what I'm going to do. I'm successful in a law firm and do all this. And now they're partners like AmLaw 100 law firms. I mean, you can do it regardless of what stage you are in your career, regardless of what's happened to you, regardless of how smart you are, regardless of what law school you went to. You can develop these narratives for yourself, and you need to do things like doing what you're doing exactly right now, like listening to this type of webinar. You need to surround yourself with positive information. You need to learn from people that have succeeded. You need to resist people that are negative and dragging you down. You need to if you have to resist your parents, if you have to resist your family, if you have to resist your significant other, you need this type of positive narrative. And all these things are narrative. Communism is a narrative. Capitalism is a narrative. Christianity is a narrative. Being happy is a narrative. Being a vegetarian is a narrative. If you're a vegetarian, you might believe that killing animals is wrong. That you can only be successful if you eat like a vegetarian. I mean, you might have a dietary narrative. Everyone has a narrative, and then when they have that narrative, they're going to gravitate towards other people that support their beliefs and the way they think about things. So if you have a narrative, you're going to be, it's Christianity, you're going to surround yourself. Maybe you'll go to church. Maybe you'll think about things in, that way. But, if you're going to be an attorney and you're going to succeed, and you're going to work in a law firm and you're going to have a long-term career and you're going to make as much money as possible, then you're going to need to have a narrative that's going to serve you and make you successful. And you need to be around other people that have positive narratives. Another thing people do is very amazing is, they'll start out in this small dinky law firm but they'll say, I can achieve all these things. I can do all these things. I can be better than the attorneys I'm around. And within a few years, they become even as associates, they're better attorneys than the partners are working with. They have this narrative that I'm going to keep going, I'm going to succeed, and then they go and they get interviews in bigger law firms, and the bigger law firms are like, wow, this person like really thinks awesome, has high, thoughts about practicing law. They really want to succeed. They're positive. They're all these things, and suddenly, they're in these firms where it may take them 2 years, it may take them 5 years, and make them 10 years, but they're in these firms where they're surrounded by, the most successful attorneys in the country, and they're big firms, and they're doing all these things because people recognize you. Like, you go into interviews, like, there's certain things that are important. Like, first of all, the law firm's looking at you and do the work. Can you do the job? The other one is like, are you going to be manageable? Are you going to do what we want of you? And are you going to follow directions? And are you going to be someone that is not, negative and stuff? They want to see if you're going to be, manageable. And then they want to see if they think you're going to stick around long term. Do you like really believe in this profession? But the most important thing is, like, do you want the job? Like, if you want the job, like, you're going to come across with an incredible level of enthusiasm that other people simply don't have. And that law firm's going to see that, and they're going to be like, wow, this person really wants to work here. Wow, this person really wants this. If we hire them, they're going to be very excited, and that's going to make, us feel good about themselves. I mean, make us feel good about themselves by hiring them. We want to give someone a chance that's really, really motivated. If you develop a negative narrative about your career, people are going to pick it up. Anytime you're thinking something negative, you're going to show it. I love this story, and I've told it before, but my father was in the CIA. When he started there, he was in Switzerland, and he would go in and, have handlers and things that, talk to you. And so he would go into these like doctor's offices with people that were friendly to the cause or whatever, who knows. And he would go in there, and then he would go into like an examination room, and then his handler would show up. And he said one of the first things that happened that made him, like, on the path to being a very good spy is he went in, he was supposed to be following or making friends with someone at this university in Switzerland. They put him in there like a student, and he was supposed to make friends with this person and get information from them and learn about them. And so, he went into his handler like he was, pretty new on this job, and he started talking about what a loser the guy was, like how he didn't like how he had these bad habits and things. And the guy just said, stop, stop. And he said, you're never going to be successful at this if you think negatively about the people that you're spying on. You have to actually think positive thoughts, because if you think negatively about them, you're trying to make friends with them, even if you're saying the right things and things like that, you're going to show it. You're going to, however you think about that person, they're going to pick it up. And so if you think negatively about your firm, if you think negatively about practicing law, if you think, you are going to show it, and you will be driven out like a virus. That's just how it happens. And so you have to have a very positive narrative about yourself. You have to have a very positive narrative about your career. You have to have a very positive narrative about what's possible. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be extremely successful. This is the difference between, people that are positive and people that are negative. Anthony Robbins, and you can learn a lot from people that have risen from nothing and become successful. He didn't have any money. He was living in a basement of one of his friend's houses. And, whatever happened to him, something caught fire. He decided that he was only going to believe positive thoughts about himself. And so he went to a store, and he bought all this big poster board and markers, and he, got these clotheslines, and he hung up all these things. He would write, I'm, a force for God and good, or I'm, going to be successful no matter what. He would write these like poster boards and put them all around this basement, and just look at them, and surround himself with positive information, because he wanted to develop this narrative. And he's taken that narrative of himself, and he's, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and started this huge self-improvement company. It was all because of the narrative. And, you read books that make people successful. One book I always recommend is Think and Grow Rich. Buy it for, not very much money, like $5, $6, appear back on Amazon, but that will help you develop a narrative. It has, things about persistence in it. Like, that's one of the most important things. It has things about, having groups of people that you talk to and you surround yourself with that have positive narratives, called mastermind groups. It talks about, goals. It talks about, all these things that successful people do to help you develop this narrative. And that's what you need if you're going to be successful. I just can't stress this enough. This is what people that succeed and do well in their careers and their lives do. And that's what people that don't succeed don't do. I mean, your religion, you're a Orthodox Jew, you're going to have a certain narrative about the world. You're a devout Mormon, you're going to have a certain narrative about, being married and, your children and not drinking and coffee and all these narratives are what's going to make you successful. And, religions are good for a certain type of narrative. And, all these things are good, but this is what people to do to succeed. This is really one of the most important things you can do in your life is you can develop a positive narrative for yourself, and you can believe in yourself and what's possible, and you can avoid negative people, and you can do all these things. And if you do all these things, your life is going to change. And I just can't tell you enough. No matter how successful you might feel like you are right now, like maybe you are successful, but you can become even more successful with the right narratives. And all these things are possible. Like it's the way it works. And people will develop negative narratives. And when they do, everything falls apart. Businesses fall apart because the CEOs or the owners don't believe it anymore, what's possible, even though they achieve something. Lives fall apart because people have these negative narratives. Careers fall apart because people have these negative narratives. And what I want for you is I want you to be in a position where your entire career, your entire life changes because you're able to develop ways of thinking about yourself and ways of thinking about your career and ways of thinking about your possibilities that are just going to change everything. And it's just so important. And I really hope you're able to do that, with yourself, because if you do that, just everything changes and nothing is ever the same. Okay, so I'll take questions right now. This is a live webinar, so I would encourage you to ask questions about anything. Now, you may not want to ask questions about narratives because it's kind of a philosophical type thing, but you certainly can. But you can also ask questions about anything to do with your career. And I would recommend, asking as many questions as you have. If you are worried because you're logged into Zoom or something and you're worried your name will show, I won't show your name. So when you ask these questions, what I would encourage you to do is, anything that you're stuck on, anything that, you're wondering about, I can help you. And I'm not like some sort of God or anything. I've been just doing nothing but this for 25 years. And I know the answers to most questions, which I'm, happy about. But, any question that you have, I can hopefully help you answer it. And sometimes, the questions that you ask are things that, if you get the right answer, it can just change everything. I mean, just because I've seen it before. Okay, so I will take questions. Again, I would encourage everyone to ask as many questions as you have. I will take just right now, just a short 1 minute break, not just for me, but for everyone that's on the meeting. One of the things, I would say too, is I think that the questions are often the most important part of the webinar because people, have issues that they might be concerned about. And if you do, the odds are, because there's so many people on this webinar, that other people may have some of the same questions too. So these could help you. Also, these questions, one of the benefits of them, just from your perspective, is that these questions are all, recorded, and then there's notes taken. I mean, they're posted on BCG, your answers to them. So, when you ask a good question, I mean, you might be helping, thousands of attorneys and whoever, law students, and everybody that has the same questions throughout their careers. It's very, very helpful. I certainly can't anticipate all the questions that people have, but but I mean, again, if you ask questions, I mean, you're potentially helping tens of thousands of people. I guess we'll take a quick break, and then when I come back, I will do questions. And again, please ask as many questions as you have. I will stick around as long as necessary to answer them all. Thanks. All right, so let's go to questions. Second here. Thank you, everyone who's asking questions. Again, this is very helpful, for a lot of people. Any type of question you ask. I mean, again, keep in mind that good questions literally are helping thousands of people. And these questions, when they're asked, will, oh, geez, what the heck? When these questions are asked, they're, something that is, forever. Like people will, be able to refer to your questions, and you'll help so many people. So thanks everyone for asking them. And again, the more questions you have, the better for you, the better for webinar attendees, but also the better for, other people's careers along the way. Okay, I used to work for the courts and was fired by the judge I worked for. I was recently hired by a firm and have appearances in the same court. I don't mind going to court. It's extremely unlikely that the judge will handle any case for my firm, but if I run into the judge in the elevator, whatever will probably eventually happen. How should I act? I can prevent it. I've been brainstorming, but I'd like to know how to handle the situation in a professional way. Okay, so this is a good question. Just to start, when I got out of law school, I got a job with this far right Republican judge. I didn't really know anything about politics, about how different people from politics saw the world. I was in this court, and the court reporter and some other people had very negative opinions about this judge. I surrounded myself with them. They became my friends. The judge picked up on it. He realized that, that I was now had a negative opinion about him and the way he thought about things. It affected my job, and I ultimately got fired. And when I got fired, I was in this small market, Bay City, Michigan. I hadn't taken the bar because it was tier clerkship, and I, was waiting to take it till I got out. And anyway, so I got fired. I didn't have the bar. I didn't, what was I going to do? And when that happened, I was scheduled to get married. My fiance had moved with me to this town, and she left me, and I didn't have a job. I didn't have, my significant other. I was literally scheduled to get married in a couple months. She left me. She thought I was never going to succeed. I was in this situation where I was in a horrible situation. I was fired, didn't have the bar, didn't have a source of income. I mean, I had my asphalt business, which I started doing, but so what did I do? I also wasn't particularly good at interviewing. I had interviewed a lot of places when I was in law school and didn't get jobs. Without the bar and everything. So I decided I was gonna do everything I could. I started believing in myself. When I lost my job, I was like decided, I was depressed. I was drinking beer every night, smoking, even though I don't really smoke. It was just insane. And I decided I need to pick myself up, and I needed to do everything I possibly could to fix myself and develop better belief in myself. And I did all this, and I thought about everything I'd ever done wrong, and I wrote it all down. I took a notebook and I wrote everything that I'd done wrong in my career, everything I'd done wrong in law school, everything I'd done wrong as a summer associate, everything I'd done wrong in this court. And I studied it and decided I was going to pick myself up and become successful. I ended up getting a job at Quinn Emanuel. Like, when I got a job there, it was a smaller firm. It was all these people that had worked at Gravasway and more, which is like one of the best firms in the world. And I went to Virginia, and it was like the worst law school. They never hired anybody from Virginia. Everybody had come from like Stanford, Yale, Harvard, all these schools. And so I was suddenly at this, firm. I got a job with this incredibly successful firm. And I did it because I learned how to turn myself around and develop a positive narrative for myself. Like, I may have lost this job, but I'm still going to be an awesome attorney. And I did all these things, and no one in the court thought I was going to succeed. There was U.S. attorneys and everything there. They was like, what's wrong with this guy? He's never going to amount to anything. The judge thought that. My co-clerk thought that. Everyone just thought I was, basically not, fit for the practice of law. So I decided to pick myself up. So fine, you worked in a court and you got fired. One of the things, anybody that's been fired on this call, like, I will tell you that most attorneys, more than half of them, probably more than 75% of them, have been fired from jobs. You can get fired in your first job. You can get fired when you're 10 years out, 20 years out. Most people have been fired. It's what they do with that matters. So if you got fired by a judge, he may have negative opinions of you. You may think you're never going to succeed because of what happened with this judge, but everyone gets fired. Everybody can learn with their experience, and you have two ways of looking at it. So when you get fired, you have two ways of looking at getting fired. One is, I'm depressed, I'll never amount to anything. This horrible thing happened to me. I'm really just kind of bummed out about it. I had this thing happen years ago where I wrote this article, and when I wrote it, I was literally in the hospital. Like, had a bad hernia, or like in my stomach, muscle popped out. And I was in the hospital, and they were giving me like Phenytoil and all these things for the pain. And I wrote this article, which I never should have written, but I was kind of like, I said some negative things that, recruiting coordinators, were women. They were good looking. Just things I should never have said. And all these news stories ran and stuff about that. I'd say these negative things, and they weren't intended to be negative. They were just kind of like, I make observations about attorneys that are negative. I was making observations about people in law firms that hired my candidates that never should have made. So all these news stories came out, and basically implying that I was sexist. And so I hired a public relations firm, like the best I could, like this company called Citric, and which is a very good like crisis management public thing. And there was a guy that came by, and he was one of the people that worked there and very successful. And
very close with like Rush Limbaugh and helped him. I mean, just a very good guy. And I was depressed about this. He said, when bad things happen to people like you have two ways of reacting. One is to get sad. He's like, a lot of people get sad, and the other is to get mad. And getting mad means like you're mad about what happened, you're going to fix it, and you're going to try even harder. And that's what you need to do. Tony Robbins always says, people look at negative things in two ways. They either get depressed and think badly, or they get mad. And they use that anger as like rocket fuel to make them better. So if you got fired, why not show that judge like I showed my judge? I mean, no one could believe it. I mean, I got the job at like one of the best firms in the world, and then did very well there. And I mean, it's just but you use this stuff as rocket fuel. You use negative things that happen to you in a way that empowers you and makes you work harder and makes you learn from your lessons and all these things, and you become more successful. So who cares if you got fired and you're at the state court as this judge? You prove to them that you can do anything, that you're much more successful. You become more successful than the judge. You become incredibly successful, and you do your best. You use this rocket fuel to get better and better. And that judge hears about how you're making all these great appearances, and you have presence in the court, and you do all these things, and then you get a better job and you go back there even more successful firm. You use negative things that happen to you as rocket fuel. You don't you don't get upset and depressed about it. You just don't let it affect you. I mean, you use it as rocket fuel. So keep in mind, everyone's been fired, for most attorneys, so who cares? I mean, it's a learning lesson, and you make the most of it. Okay, what are the ethical considerations of leaving a law firm for a competitor? None. So that's your job. Your job as an attorney is to get the best possible work you can, to move to a better firm, to advance. So there's nothing wrong with leaving a firm for a competitor. Why? Who cares? I mean, if you're advancing your career in your life, you should do everything you can to work in the best firm possible. And that doesn't mean you have to switch jobs every year. It just means you're constantly thinking about what's better for me, what's better for my career, how can I do better, like all these things. So there's nothing wrong with leaving a law firm for better. As a matter of fact, you should. I mean, if there's a better job there, why not? Okay, I had a job for mostly two reasons: one, helping my parents through severe illness, and two, working for companies that got acquired Silicon Valley. That is common. I don't want the potential employers to think I'm negative thinking. Is there a way to still look positive in my applications? So the only way to look positive in your applications, first of all, there's nothing, if you put an application into a firm, the firm is going to hire the best person it can. So it's going to look at your employment stability. It's going to look at all these things. The firm's going to hire the best person it can. So are you the best person? Like if you're trying to work in a law firm and you've gone in-house and things, like that tells law firms that you're probably not committed to working in a law firm. So it's going to be harder for you to get a job. So you think about, okay, so, I did that. So how do I stick out? So the only way to stick out usually is either to apply to places that aren't getting a lot of applications, or maybe you have some specific skills, or to meet people inside the law firm and try to network. It's a very possible good way of getting jobs, or whatever. I mean, get an interview someplace and impress people. So there's not much you can do about your applications. Your applications need to be geared towards law firms in a way that they're, or employers, that it looks like you're excited about it, that you have something to offer, and so forth. So how do you get rid of negative thinking? Anything that happens to you, you just, whatever. I mean, it was negative, but you don't adopt that as your, as your mindset. You become enthusiastic. You learn how to, rise above things. If your company got acquired, maybe you did a really good job in helping with that acquisition. That's positive. Just because you had to help your parents through severe illnesses, that's fine. I mean, keep in mind, by the way, and this is something that everybody should think of. Again, you're 40 years old and all this stuff happened over a 15-year career. You still have another 45 years of your career. So, if you're 60, you still have another 25 years. I mean, people like adopt these negative mindsets and they think that nothing's going to happen despite their age. I mean, if you're 30, you got 55 years. I mean, maybe more. I mean, people are living longer. So anything you want to, any negative thoughts you want to have about yourself, you can always overcome them. Unless you're 70 years old, you're probably set in your ways, but people overcome all this stuff all the time. And so you have to, if you don't get a great job because you have all this stuff in your resume, you look like a job hopper or whatever, then you start off in a smaller firm or a smaller environment, and then you rise from there. Anybody can do it. It's not hard. You just need to really believe in yourself and, think about things in a way, that other people aren't, and then use that belief to become better. Yeah, how often do you see attorneys in their 50s reinvent the legal practice, or maybe more specifically, the legal identity? I've been practicing for 20 years and I'm not loved it. However, I feel like I still have time to turn things around, pivot, and develop a more or find something more positive. Is it realistic? Absolutely. Anybody can develop something more positive and become a better attorney that's in their 50s. There's all these different practice areas people can do. Even if you're like don't think you want to work in a law firm or whatever, you can start your own practice. You can do one of the big practices that people start with absolutely no experience. Like they start it and they end up without any experience. They end up doing well and then learning it. I've seen people start these trust and estates practices. Like I know this one guy in Malibu, it's absolutely incredible. I knew this woman that owned a couple small buildings in Malibu. I mean, not huge buildings, but one of them was in a courthouse, and an old courthouse in Malibu. And the best office there was this office that was the former courtroom. And it was like this awesome office. And, I asked her, like, who's the guy in there? And she's like, it's absolutely incredible. Like he, graduated from law school at the age of 25, and now he's like 29. He's got this extremely successful trust and estate practice. He just bought a $5 million house in Malibu. So think about that. Like someone, 3 or 4 years that just learned didn't get a job, just learned how to be a trust and estates attorney. Maybe he just started with scratch, who knows? But he started this very successful, solo practice as a trust and estates attorney with no experience, and became very successful doing that. I mean, very quickly, like more successful than probably people from his school that got into Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher or whatever, a huge law firm. So he, changed his life and by learning something new. So if you're in your 50s, I mean, you could do that. You could start trust and estates practice. You could do all these different things. You could start personal injury, family law. Family law is another big one. Like people start that with absolutely nothing. Like they have no idea how to do it. There was a guy he'd gone to Stanford Law School. He worked at Quinn Emanuel, and then he didn't like it after 7 or 8 years, quit. Keep in mind, it's probably making the equivalent of like $500,000 or $600,000 a year. Quit Quinn Emanuel with absolutely no job, but decided he was going to be a family law attorney. And suddenly he's representing my now ex-wife in her divorce, and billing out at like $750 an hour, which was unfortunate because I think I had to pay it. But very, very successful. Just decided he was going to do something new and became a family law attorney. He used his background working in a big law firm to say he was, how to do litigation or whatever. But people can do all these things. People reinvent themselves all the time. I reinvented myself and decided I was going to become, first of all, when I quit practicing law at a big law firm, I was very enthusiastic and motivated and stuff. So when I quit, my first thing that I was going to do before I learned about recruiting, I was going to develop my own practice, just have my own solo practice. And I started generating business. Now, back then, people advertised in like the Yellow Pages, which is a print edition and everything, but I decided to put an ad in there and started getting all these calls. And before I knew it, I had enough work by the time I quit from these Yellow Pages advertisements, and people actually in my own law firm thinking I was going to start my own practice, sending me work. Like one of the cases they sent me was like the dean of Pepperdine. He was getting divorced, and this, even though I had no divorce experience. So so I had all this work, and I had when I finally left the law firm, like after 3 months, I hadn't taken any of the jobs I had, but I sat down and I calculated it, and I had like 3 weeks of work I could do, billing out at like, I don't know, $400 an hour or something. I had enough work to keep me busy for 3 weeks, working like 40+ hour weeks, and which is incredible. I mean, doing things I had no experience doing. I was like doing a DUI, I had family law experience. I had, work writing these web development contracts or whatever for people in Silicon Valley that, had been my friends and then had referred more work to me, I'd gone to high school with. But the point is, I've easily reinvented myself with a solo practice just by getting myself out there and advertising and things. And I didn't do it. I gave away all the work, which is crazy, but that's what I did. I gave away all the work that I had to other attorneys. But the point is that anybody can do anything. You can reinvent yourself. It's probably easier to reinvent yourself at 50 than it would be at 30, like I did, because you have all this experience and you're a better attorney. You can you can take whatever you've done and push it into something larger. If you're a corporate attorney, you can find, small corporate clients to do work for. And I mean, all these different things, anybody can do anything. There's classes you can take to learn how to be a trust and estates attorney. There's classes or, businesses like that do nothing but teach people how to generate business as a personal injury attorney or trust and estates attorney. I mean, you can literally do anything. And, so especially if you have experience, yes, you can reinvent yourself. You can reinvent yourself easily. You can do what I talked about. This guy started this trust and estates business out of nothing and was making enough money to afford a $5 million house within, 4 or 5 years. It means, by the way, that he would have had to probably put down, I don't know, 20%, which means at least, or maybe 30, which means he'd made enough money to put down, $1 million or $1.5 million or $2 million in this house. And then, to afford a, $3 or $4 million mortgage. I mean, a $4 million mortgage would be about $30,000 a month, which means, before even paying that, you'd have to make $60,000 a month. And then not only do you need to make $60,000 a month, but you probably have to have reserves of 6 months, would be $360,000. And then you'd probably have to, to be up in 60,000 a month is probably not enough. You'd probably have to show that you made that for at least a couple of years. And then you'd have to make more than $60,000 a month because they would want you to have extra money for property tax. I mean, just think about the kind of money you can make. You can do anything. I mean, and this, you can start a trust and estates project. You can start an immigration project. You start a family law practice. You can go to work at another law firm, and anybody can get a job in a law firm. You just need to apply to enough places. I can get anyone a job. I don't care who they are. If I represent someone, I can get them a job. Now, I'm not going to represent everyone. I'm going to represent someone that, has a certain amount of skills in a certain practice area, but you can do anything. So never limit yourself by, what you think is possible. It's absolutely insane. And people do that all the time. They limit themselves and they think that they're that's what their life is. And regardless of your age, you can do anything. Harrison, very good points in having constructed narratives. It's a game changer. In elementary school, they brought a man in to teach cybernetics in the school gym, visualizing yourself doing something and seeing it come to fruition. He used basketball as an example. It worked. I applied for an associate position on Saturday, and a few hours later, the partner emailed and asked if I could come in for an interview. I went this past Monday, was interviewed by 4 partners. It lasted about an hour. I feel more well because I was really prepared. I had a great feeling about all the partners in the atmosphere of the firm. They said they'd let me know soon. As a partner walked into the elevator, he whispered, "I really think the clients will love you." You could easily end the interaction by saying thanks for coming in or something along those lines. I'm just curious if I should anticipate partners saying things that look promising, but they don't really mean anything at all. Well, so typically if you do badly in an interview, this is kind of something, they'll say good luck or something like that when you walk out. So if somebody said something like that to you when you're walking up the elevator, that's a good sign that they probably want to hire you. Now, it doesn't mean that they will hire you. When you go in for an interview and you think things went well, and it did go well, there's all sorts of reasons you might not get hired. You might not get hired because the law firm decides they don't have enough work. You might not get hired because for whatever reason, someone better comes along. Sometimes they may want to hire people from better schools, or they might want to hire people with more experience. You don't know. So, the only way to succeed in interviews is to interview enough places, and eventually you'll find something good. So you just don't, if you don't get a job one place, I mean, keep in mind, I mean, this is something people don't understand. In BCG, like this is just BCG, like we have 80,000 law firms, like 80,000 that we target for our candidates, but that number, 80,000, like we look at it, is actually much fewer than there are law firms. Like that's the only resource. It takes a lot of resources to monitor this place for job. That's the only resource that we have to get people jobs. Now that's a lot of firms. I mean, that's, and we're adding like, 3,000 a week and updating these all. But I mean, there are so many freaking places that attorney can work. I mean, if we have 80,000, that means there's well over probably 3 times that, or 150 or whatever. There are so many places you can work, regardless of the market you're in. There's so many places you can work, and people will take the New York bar and think they only need to work in New York City, when in reality there's 3,000 plus cities in New York and all over the state, and these different places you can work. And people don't think about things that way. There's so many opportunities. Who cares if you don't get one job? If you don't get one job, it's not your fault. It just means that, that whatever, they don't have the work, or someone better came along, or someone said something negative about you, one of the partners didn't like you. There's nothing that you can do. So just apply to enough places. Anybody can get a job. There's so many freaking law firms out there. I mean, it's just absolutely insane how many places there are to work. It would just blow your mind. I mean, 80,000 places in the BCG database means whatever. There's so many places. Do a search on Google, for firms that do the kind of work you do and do it in different cities, and you'll be amazed. Thousands of places. Anybody can get a job. Okay, how can our firm better identify attorneys who are struggling due to false narratives before they burn out or leave? Well, the best way to identify attorneys that are going to succeed. So, this is a good question. Can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? These are things that I've developed over, 25 plus years of doing this. Let me just put a big question marks there. I mean, so do you want the job? You're not, there's other ones, I'm not even remembering them. Do you want the job? Do we like you? Do we like you? Okay, so these are the 5 things that a law firm should ask when they're hiring people. And this is for everyone here too, because even if, these aren't articulated, these are really what law firms are thinking. So can you do the job is pretty simple, meaning, can you do the type of work that we have? Do you have the skills? But also, will you blow the hours? Will you come into the office if we don't want you to work remotely? All these things determine if you can do the job. So, generally you can ask people questions. If they sure about wanting to work remotely or fewer hours or whatever, then they're probably not a good fit if that's what you need. Can you do the job long term is pretty simple. Like you're saying, attorneys are struggling due to false narratives. So, if people are leaving firms a lot, or moving a lot, maybe they think negatively or they don't get along well in firms. And so you have to identify people that look like they're going to stay there a long time. And that's what you also need to think about if you're, if you're interviewing places, because they're looking at that. Are you going to stick around? Can you be managed? Meaning, will you do the type of work we have? Will you do things the way we want them? Even, by the way, in the largest law firms in the country, where partners are making millions of dollars a year, they are managed by the firm, by executive committees and everything like that. And they are managed by the other partners. People need to be managed. But I think, if you're looking for people that are struggling due to false narratives, before they burn out and leave, then you have to decide, does that attorney, really want to work here? Do they seem motivated? Do they, are they excited about the job? And so, that's one of the biggest things. The narrative means, does the person really like this job? Do they look like they're going to stick around? Do they, is this something that they want? And so how do you do that? Law firms do it in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways they do it is when the person is a junior associate, they'll typically be very critical about their work, and the person will learn because they're young and they don't want to fail and things. This is what hopefully happens. But when they get more senior, when they get like 3 or 4 years of experience, what law firms do is they will often, because and this is just something for everyone to think about, you're most marketable when you have like 3 to 6 years of experience. That's when you're most marketable, because you know what you're doing. The law firm can manage you. I mean, you know what you're doing. You're profitable because you can do work without a lot of supervision. You're valued with the partners. Your billing rate's not as high. So what law firms do when someone gets like 3 to 6 years of experience is they'll typically like encourage them. They'll be like, you're on the right path to be a partner. You're doing good work. Everyone likes you. This is kind of what happens to most attorneys that are mid-levels, even the largest law firms. Everyone likes you. You're doing good work. You have possibilities here. You can, you look like you're partnership material. They'll say all these things to people that are mid-levels, even though there might not be no room to be a partner. So if you want to give people like positive narratives, you need to encourage them when they're, especially when they know what they're doing. You need to encourage them and make them believe that there's possibilities and they can do well. And if you do that, then people are going to think, I can succeed and I can do well. So this is what most law firms do is and if people are encouraged, then they're going to want to stick around. They're going to think that's positive. If people aren't encouraged and they have false narratives, then they won't stick around. So law firms have to, make people believe in what is possible when they're young attorneys, they're mid-levels. And if they believe that, they're going to want the job. And then they work harder for you, and they'll, be profitable, and they'll stick around, and they'll have a positive narrative about what's possible for them instead of a negative narrative, which a lot of toxic law firms do. They don't give people positive narratives. Okay, next question. How do I know if the traditional big law path is actually right for me, or if I'm just following what everyone else is doing? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the big law path, because everyone thinks, oh, I need a job in a big law firm. I need, this is what going to make me successful. This is what everyone's doing. Big law firms are people working in big law firms are like maybe 2% or 1% of all the attorneys that graduate from law school, that are practicing law. Maybe 1 to 2% are in this big law path. So then you get another 98 or 95, whatever the percentage is. I mean, it's very small. You get the other, huge percent of attorneys that aren't working in big law firms. So people think they need to work in big. No, working in a big law firm, by the way, how do you know if it's right for you? First of all, I will say to everyone on this call that if you can get a job in a big law firm when you're young, or even when you have 5 or 6 years of experience, that is a good move. Why is it a good move? Because big law firms have big clients, and those big clients are willing to pay a lot of money for the best possible work that you can do. And so they want people to do very detailed work. They want people to look at problems in a lot of depth. Big law attorneys have to usually give the work to general counsels who are typically from large law firms. They have to do work that is the best possible, because these large clients can use anyone they want. So the type of work you do in a big law firm and to learn from that is very good. I mean, if you do that, you're going to become a better attorney throughout the course of your life and your career. Now, is that right for you? No, it's not right for you if it's not what you want. So if you look at the partners in big law firms and you just, it's something that doesn't appeal to you, or you feel like you're going to be limited. So you are limited to a great extent of large law firms, because the odds of becoming a partner are very slim. So, and if you don't bring in large clients and all these things, so it may not be right for you. But, my thing about being right is you try to get experience in the largest law firm you can to learn how to be the best possible attorney you can, which you will learn in a big law firm in terms of the quality of work. And then you can take that experience and do anything you want with it. You start your own practice and be very detailed. You can go to work in house or whatever. So you don't just you do what everyone else is doing, because it is smart, if you can, to get the type of experience, to learn how to do work on behalf of large clients, to learn to be the best possible attorney you can. But it doesn't mean you have to stick with that for a whole career. People do all sorts of things. And in terms of what they're doing, being an attorney in a large law firm doesn't work for most people. It doesn't work for 98% of the attorneys out there. So why would you think that you need to do that? I mean, again, 98% of all attorneys are not working at big law firms. So the career path that's not what 98% of attorneys are doing. So why would you think that you have to do nothing but that when no one else is doing it? I mean, hardly anybody's doing it. And there's a lot of reasons no one's doing it. First of all, they can't get jobs there, or they don't like it, or whatever it is. But you can succeed doing anything, and it doesn't have to be, in a major law firm. It's absolutely insane that people think that, because there's so many opportunities outside of big law firms. And frankly, the attorneys that make the most money, I would say the majority of them, in terms of making these huge amounts of money and stuff, are having independence and being happy practicing law, or not a large law firm. Okay, especially where, oh, give me 1 second. Sorry, I think there's 2 questions here with the same person. Let me make sure I answer them all. Make sure I answered the whole thing. Okay, doesn't ignoring the negatives set you up for cognitive dissonance, especially where as an attorney you're surrounded by negative facts of your client's cases, and is particularly your job to write those negatives. So I'm confused by what you're saying and how to implement it. Okay, so practicing law there's a lot of negativity, and especially, if you're a litigator and, there's other people on the other side that are negative and trying to push you down. Being a litigator, by the way, is a very hard job, because your bosses are, other partners in your firm, your bosses are the clients, your bosses are the court, and all those people are trying to tear you down. The court's trying to, rule against you if you don't do a good job. The clients are unhappy because you're losing half the time, maybe more if you're really good. The other partners or people you're working for are judging you. And even if you're a partner, they're judging you, and everybody's judging you, and it's a very hard job being a litigator. The court's against you, your clients are mad, the other partners you're working with are mad, but the other side is trying to push you down. So everybody, when you're a litigator, is especially, first litigation, whatever, is against you, and they're trying to push you down. So how do you overcome that? You do exactly what I've told you about. You try to, you find positive, if you're trying to sell a client, you should represent them. You have to be inspiring. You have to make them think that, anything's possible. You're gonna get the best results. And if you're gonna win in court, you have to, convince the judge. If you're gonna do well against your partners, you have to, impress them and not get pushed down. I mean, I have a friend that was a partner at Quinn Emanuel, and he was making like $4 million a year. I mean, just very, very successful. And, he said that he quit when he was like 45 and retired, which you can do when you make that kind of money for 15 years, or whatever it was. When you're 45, you retired, you became a partner at 30. But he said the hardest thing about the job was, not just getting clients and things, but how, other partners were always trying to turn around, like a partner's your enemies. And so how do you remain positive in that? Well, you have to, you can't allow everyone to push you down. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. Think about how hard being a litigator is. I mean, you just all these people against you and your own partners, the court, your clients, I mean, all these things. So you have to be positive. And if you can't be positive, then, then you're going to, you're not going to have a successful career. So, how do you remain positive? You have to believe in what you're doing. You have to, inspire clients. You have to, realize that, your partners are trying to push you down and make as much money. I mean, all these things are against you, but you have to be positive. And if you can't do that, then, how can you inspire clients? How can you get courts to rule on your behalf? All this sort of thing. So how do you implement it? You either can do it or you can't. You have to set yourself up to succeed. I mean, lawyers don't get clients by being negative and, they get clients by making the clients think they can do well. So you have to be positive, and you have to learn how to do it. And if you don't, if you can't do that, then, then you have to do something else where you're not, doing that kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with not doing it. I mean, everybody can, become successful. It's just, you need to think about, your life and your career in a certain way. Okay, what are the career benefits of specializing in a niche practice area? The career benefits of specializing in a niche area are massive. So they can be massive or they cannot be. But anytime you specialize in a niche practice area, you're in good shape. So, let's talk about you being in a market. So say you're in, I don't know, Cincinnati, Ohio. So you graduate from law school and there may be 10 people in Cincinnati, year one, Cincinnati, 1 year out of law school, maybe even less, 1 year out that are first year associates, right? So in that practice area. So what happens is it's very interesting. And this is why niche practice areas are good. So first associates. So then, let's say after, let's say 1 year. So 1 year, there's going to be, 10 people maybe in Cincinnati in the same practice area either. Maybe it's like real estate leasing, I don't know, but something. So 1 year, I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, so 10 attorneys. Let's see, 10 attorneys. 10 attorneys, they're 1 year out, right? 10 attorneys that are 1 year out in Cincinnati as first year associates doing, whatever, say real estate leasing, just as an example. Real estate leasing. Okay. So what happens is then after, 5 years, right? There might be, four, or let's just say five, in doing that practice area. And either graduated with you. And then you're like, 7 years out, let's say 8 years out, and you're, 8 years out, and there might be three, right? So 8 years, three. So what does that mean? So that means that, if you're a specialist in a practice area, there's not going to be a lot of competition. So if you were just to do, commercial litigation, there might be, 75 attorneys. And then after 8 years, it might be, 30, I mean, whatever. But if you're in a practice area where there's fewer people like you, then that means that there's less competition for jobs. That means that there's less attorneys doing that practice area. They're competing for clients. That means that there's fewer people in law firms, law firms can hire. So niche practice areas are awesome. Now, there's certain niche practice areas that are risky, like trademark law is risky because, it's dependent on different practice areas. But if you're in a niche practice area, regardless of what, city you're in, city of Cincinnati, maybe there's, 6, decent sized geographic areas in Ohio. So that means after 8 years, there might be 24 people like that. How many of those people are looking for a job after 8 years? How many, people are decent firms? I mean, so anytime you specialize in a niche practice area, you're going to have more long-term opportunity, and because there's fewer people like you. And it's like that all over the country. Like, if there's 3 people doing your practice here in Cincinnati, and you want to go to Detroit or you want to go to Chicago, I mean, there's going to be fewer people like you, and the law firms are going to have fewer people to hire, and the clients are going to have fewer people to hire, because the more niche you are, the better off you are. So niche practice areas are very smart. Now, there's some that are risky. Certain practice areas, niche practice areas are risky because, there's not a lot of openings for them and things. But in most cases, if you're in a niche practice area, the law firm is going to have a very difficult time finding someone like you, and it's going to give you a lot of career stability. So, I mean, it's very smart to be in a niche practice area. Oops, sorry. Yeah, I won't share your name. I'm not one to read into things, but in your many years of hearing about interviews, is this quite typical, or would you recommend something that's going to be positive? I'm not sure I understand that question. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. If you want to ask, whoever asked the question, if you want to answer it again. Okay, what is the title of the book you just mentioned? Thank you. So there's some really good books that you can read that will get you inspired, that I would recommend. There's Think and Grow Rich, which is a classic. Think and Grow Rich. There's also Unlimited Power, which is by Anthony Robbins. There's Unlimited Power. For different people, different books will get them inspired. Some people get inspired by the Bible, and I don't know. But you have to find books that are gonna make you successful. I like Think and Grow Rich because it was a study by Napoleon Hill. He was helped by Andrew Carnegie. We spent 20 years studying the most successful people and what did they do and how did they do it. And so it's a really good book. It's a classic. But there's a lot of books out there. Anything that inspires you to do well. And the most successful people will constantly seek out books and other information they think are going to help them be successful. It's what you need to do. So give me a second. This question is, how do I recover from career setback, like being let go from a law firm? I think I answered that question already. Just, everybody gets fired at some point in your career. If you get fired, most people get fired. Instead of getting depressed, you just use it as rocket fuel. You learn everything that happened that you could have, that you might have done wrong, and you learn from that and become a better attorney later. And again, keep in mind, everybody gets fired at some point in their career, almost everyone. Okay, give me 1 second. I'm just going to grab something. Hey, how do I recover from a career setback? Okay, so what can our firm doing during the hire process to avoid attorneys who are driven by the wrong motivations? Okay, so when a law firm's hiring an attorney, there's different motivations. One of them often is being motivated by money. So if an attorney is only motivated by money, that's not a good thing, because attorneys that are motivated by money will typically leave for the best job, the best possible job that pays the most money. So what are the right motivations? So the right motivations for associate are, does this person really want to learn this practice area? Do we offer an opportunity for them to become a better attorney? Like all those sorts of questions. And so the person's motivated by money, if they're motivated by lifestyle, all those sorts of things are the wrong motivation. The attorney should, want to learn, the practice area, and become a better attorney. That's it. So is the attorney motivated by that, or are they motivated by, money or lifestyle? So money, money, no, not as much. I mean, you can pay them that, as much, you don't pay them enough, they're not going to work there. But money, lifestyle, personal motivations, beyond money. So, if you're an attorney, you're looking for a job, your motivation really shouldn't be money. It should be, that you want to have a long-term career doing something. If you seem like someone that's that kind of person, then you're going to be a much better attorney. So those are the motivations. Is the person, do they want to learn this practice area? Do they want to become a better attorney? And if they're not motivated by that, then they're probably not going to be good hires. So I'm just reading all these questions. Okay. Is it possible to enjoy law school but still not being happy as a practice attorney? I'm sorry, is it possible to enjoy law school but still end up being unhappy as a practice attorney? How can I prevent that? Yeah, so people enjoy law school, but when you come out of law school, practicing law is, especially in a law firm, is much different than being in law school. When you're in law school, you can do well on exams and everything. When you get into a law firm, things are typically very practical. You have to kind of do things in a different way. You're trying to do work good for clients. The work is different. You have to be, it's just different types of things. So how do you prevent that? Well, when you get out, you have to remember that, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand, is that when you get out of law school, it takes, regardless of the practice area you're in, takes about 5 years to learn that practice area. And it doesn't mean it's going to be fun. So, when you start learning your practice area, you're typically, you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to make mistakes. Your work's going to be criticized, and you're not going to like that. You're not going to get the same kind of positive feedback you might get when you're in law school and doing well. So, so that's just how it works. And so people are often very unhappy, but no one said it has to be fun. So you need to learn your practice area. It may not be enjoyable when you start it, but you need to throw yourself into it. And then after doing that, you can, once you learn the practice area, it's never fun. It's not fun being a doctor. When you go out of, medical school, you do these internships or residencies and stuff, and you might have to work like 36 hours or 48 hours straight. People might enjoy serving patients, but no one enjoys working 48 hours straight without a break and things. So, it's not always fun when you're learning how to be an attorney, because you're working all these hours, you're not working on the kind of work you want. But the idea is, like, how do you prevent that? You have to realize your first 5 years out of law school are learning. That's it. I mean, you're basically, it's a pretty awesome job because you're getting paid money to learn something that you can use your entire career. And you may not enjoy it, but you're just doing all these, different things that are related to your practice area and your jobs to become a better attorney. So you might be unhappy, but you can always take that experience or whatever learning you're getting, and you can either do something else with it, work in a different practice setting, or work in a different firm, or start your own practice. I mean, there's all these things you can do with the experience, and you may not enjoy it, but you have to just remember that, it's learning. And so people don't think about that, but when you get out of school, it's a lot of learning. And the next question. Considering your remarks about the recovering attorney, were you implying that those who want to transition out of a law firm and alternate practice setting other than a law firm actually have a negative narrative by virtue of having that different direction? Well, if you think you're a recovering attorney from having worked in a law firm, then that means you're not going to be happy in a law firm, or you're not going to be happy in the same type of law firm, whatever that narrative is. But if you call yourself a recovering attorney, then you probably, either shouldn't be an attorney, or you should work in another practice setting. So people that don't like law firms and hate that kind of, practice setting, I mean, you can work in-house, you can do something else entirely, like, start another career. You can work in public interest, you can work for the government, all these different things that you can do if you don't like law firms. Now, just because you don't like one law firm doesn't mean you're not going to like all of them. But, if you don't like law firms and you consider yourself a recovering attorney, then just take yourself, I mean, first of all, you don't list that in your resume or LinkedIn, I mean, or say anything negative on social media of being an attorney, but you just can work in another practice setting. There's nothing wrong with working in another practice setting. There's, people do that all the time, and you can be happy in another practice setting or another type of law firm, or often another practice area. Some people don't like litigation. They might be happier being like a real estate attorney or corporate attorney or something. It's just, how it works. Okay. After hearing your answer to the first question, I want to ask you, was that far right judge the same individual who fired you ostensibly for a grammatical mistake you made a second time? Oh, that's actually good. So you're familiar with my work. I appreciate that, because I didn't even say that. Ostensibly for grammatical error you made the second time, or B, could the purported grammatical error have been a pretext and the judge instead formed negative narrative considering you associated with the court reporter and others who had a bad opinion of the judge? This is amazing. I don't even know if this judge is asking. This is a really good question, because that's exactly what happened to me. So I was working for this judge. I was, he didn't actually fire me. What happened is he called me in to talk to him in his office, and I was getting like really negative vibes I was picking up. So when he called me into his office to talk to me, he started bringing up this grammatical error, and I'll just tell you, like, if someone doesn't like you, so I was, very dedicated to my job. I tried hard, and the grammatical error I made is I wrote him like a 15-page memo about some legal matter, a case that was in front of him. He didn't ask me to write the memo. I was very interested in it. So I sat down and I wrote this memo, which is something that my co-clerk never would have done. But I wrote this memo that was, basically explaining this legal matter to him because I was passionate about it. And I made a grammatical error in this memo that I wasn't asked to do, that I went out of my way to, try to do a good job. And I made the grammatical error in the memo, which wasn't even something that was required, that because I was very passionate about my job, which you should try to do, that he used to basically tell me like I was doing a bad job, I mean, this error. And so he called me to his office and he started talking about this error and how it was very serious and all these sorts of things. And I was getting bad vibes. So I realized that he was in the process of firing me. And so instead of getting fired, I basically told him I quit, but I was fired. I mean, I was going to lose my job within 3 minutes or whatever. So I quit just so I could say I wasn't fired, but I was fired. I mean, I would have been fired. So he used that grammatical error as a pretext. He wasn't going to say, hey, I don't like the fact that you're not buying into this far right stuff. And the far right stuff, man, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like a lot of people don't realize how it works with judges and things, but what happens is it's very interesting. I mean, I never knew this before I worked for this judge, but judges will they're Republicans or Democrats, and so the rulings will come out. That's why presidents appoint certain types of Supreme Court judges and appellate judges. But when the judge rules on matters, they always will basically rule in a way that supports a political belief. So this particular judge was kind of interesting. Like if if a criminal defendant came up there, he would always want to make sure that they lost their trials or whatever, so he could rule in a certain way. He could make faces, about certain matters. He could treat, criminal attorney a certain way. He could, write opinions that would make it, difficult, if not impossible, for criminals to win. So criminals never won. And then also big business, like he would always come out on behalf of big business and make rulings on behalf of big businesses, opposed to people who are suing. It's very interesting, like how judges can work. So yeah, so he used the pretext of making a grammatical error instead of, talking to me about these negative opinions I had of him. And that's what people will do. When you get fired a lot of times, it's often just because it's usually because someone doesn't like you. I mean, if someone likes you, they won't do these sorts of things. They won't fire you. They'll keep you around. They'll help you. But if they don't like you and they don't think you're on your side, they will fire you. And you would do the same thing. Like if someone was working for you and you knew they thought negatively of you or the way you thought about the world, you would not want them to work for you. And that's just how judges are. That's how any employer is. So if you have a negative narrative about anybody you're working for, they will fire you, but they will just come up, they come up with a stupid reason, or they'll come up with no reason at all. But telling me I made a bad grammatical error and it was the second time. I mean, when I got to working with those judges, it's just something that's kind of interesting. I made a very serious error. It's kind of funny, but it's what happened. So I was new. I'd been working there a couple of weeks, and there's these things called habeas corpus petitions where people will write these motions to try to get out of prison or whatever when they're convicted of things. And so you just kind of, you read these things very quickly, and then you just go, denied or granted. So I don't know what happened, but there was this case and I was going through these things. There's a bunch of them. You might have to read 15, and just deny them all. But for whatever reason, I made the stupidest error I could possibly say. And I granted one of these, and the judge read it, and he called me into his office and closed the door. And he's like, "Are you out of your mind?" And I made a huge mistake. That was right when I was there. He was very upset about it, and which he should have been. It was a huge error. So after that, I was like kind of on pins and needles, and I learned to be very, very careful with my work and all this sort of things, and double check it, and became a better attorney. But yeah, so if someone wants to get rid of you, they will get rid of you, and they will call it a mistake you made. They will find reasons to get rid of you, to justify it, and oftentimes they're not going to say it's because they don't like you. I knew a woman that, this is years ago, maybe 20 years ago or even 25, and she was one of my candidates, and she was working at a great firm, I mean, awesome law firm, Morrison and Forrester, and in Silicon Valley, and she'd gone to Berkeley Law School, and did really good work, but was negative about the law firm, associated with the wrong people. And she wasn't making these kind of errors like I talked about. But one day, someone walked into her office and they were just like, we don't think this is a good fit, you're fired. And that's what happened. And I'm not saying that Morrison and Forrester is a bad firm. But this is what all firms do. I mean, they will push out people that are negative and that are on their side. And, they will make up reasons for doing it. They will give them bad reviews. They will, one thing that was interesting that happened to me, this is just something to help people too, is I was working in this big New York law firm when I was a summer associate, my second year. And I got into my first review. They kind of reviewed you, midsummer, like after 5 or 6 weeks, and then, and they give you a review. And I got into this review, and it was like this law firm, it was all wood paneling and everything, and the lights were dark. It was just really weird. But it was like you might see in a movie or something. And they called me in there and they gave me this like horrible review. It was just like, Jesus Christ. And, it was horrifying. And I mean, I was like scared. I mean, they were making shit up and stuff. And I mean, they were making stuff up, but it was just like, very, very critical. And then there was another woman that I went to law school with, and she had a friend in the firm, and she got a great review. And she said, the only thing you need to do to get a really good review here and to do well is just bill as many hours as you can. So that's what's valuable to them. So I went the second half of the summer and I worked like crazy. I get in there like 9 in the morning. I worked till like 10 o'clock at night. And I did that, 5 days a week. I would come in on the weekends. And other summer associates work. And there wasn't really a difference in the quality of my work. It was just that all of these hours. So I got into the review at the end of the summer, and it was just, they couldn't say enough positive things about me. But my work wasn't any different. It was just that I was billing hours. So they weren't going to tell me in my first review that they didn't like me because I was coming in at 10 and leaving at 5 and billing, 20, 35 hours a week. They weren't going to tell me you're not billing enough, because that would be bad. They just basically gave me this horrible review, which means basically we don't want to hire people that aren't going to bill a lot of hours. So I went in, and in my second review, I got this incredible review because I was billing like 56 hours a week. It was a bad time in the legal market. It was like 1994 or something. There was a huge recession in the legal market. And out of my entire class, like only 2 people got offers. It was the girl that had told me to bill all these hours, and it was myself. That was it. So just I figured out what they wanted, and it was to bill a lot of hours. So how would you figure out not get fired by this judge? You would be on his side. You would defend him to the court reporter. You would do exactly what he wanted. You would rule in the way he wanted you to do. Because what happens with a judge, you just basically get these briefs from both sides, and then you come out with a ruling, and you give it to the judge, this written ruling. And if he doesn't like it, he'll tell you, no, I want to rule on behalf of the defendant or whatever, and you go back. But you won't argue with him. You won't write memos like against what he wants to read. You'll just be on his side. And that's what people want. They want to surround themselves with people that support them. Law firms want to do that. That's why they push out negative people. Judges do that. Companies do that. I know a lot of people that have been fired from in-house jobs. Very, very interesting. So, and a lot of people get fired from in-house jobs from law firms. So if you want to go in-house and work in a company, like what companies are doing is companies are, especially, the CEOs and everybody, they're trying to, they're trying to make as much money as possible. So in order to make as much money as possible, they have to, they have to do things that are questionable. It might not even be legal. I mean, they just want to do things that are going to help advance the company and make money. So people go in-house, and they go in-house, and they're like, oh, I need to, really, this is unethical. This is, the company shouldn't do this. And really what CEOs and all these people inside of companies are doing is they're looking for in-house attorneys that will figure out a way for them to do something. They will figure out a way for them to make money, basically, and tell them how they can bend the rules and all these things. So people go in-house all the time and they don't realize that. And they will, come out against the CEO or whoever, and they'll tell them this is unethical, you can't do this, like this is horrible, and they will get fired. And people get fired all the time from in-house jobs because they don't realize that simple thing that your job really is to help the company bend the rules and come out with the best result possible so they make money. And people don't understand this. They get fired from these in-house jobs and like, this company was unethical, they did this wrong, they did this wrong. I had something funny happen. He was a friend of mine, and he was a associate at Morgan, Lewis and Bacchus, is very good corporate attorney. And he decided he wanted to go in-house. I don't remember the name of the company, some medical company. After 6 years of doing this, he went in-house and he did exactly that. Like, he told people like why they couldn't do things and stuff. So he got fired very quickly, like after 4 months. And I mean, this is a funny story. I shouldn't even be telling it. But he went in-house and got fired, and then the company was doing something unethical, and he wouldn't help them. He didn't. I mean, it was questionable, I guess. And so they fired him. So then he sued them, and then when he sued them, very funny. He made up the story that the CEO, who was a man, was sexually harassing him, which is just hilarious. I mean, it wasn't true, but anyway, that's what happened to him. But yeah, you go in house, you don't bend the rules and get people what they want. You go in a law firm, you don't act the way they want you to act, and the partners and things think you're against them. The people will fire you, and you often, will not know why. I mean, this guy got fired from this in-house job. They weren't firing him for bad work. They were firing him for not helping them and not taking their side. And that's what people do. Like, they will fire you if if you're not supporting. Okay, I do have a few more questions to answer, but if anybody has any additional questions, there's still hundreds of people on this webinar, but if you have any additional questions, please ask them now, because I think I'm almost out of questions. Okay, let's see here. I just wanted to know if it's common for a partner to say something that could be interpreted as being hopeful and it means anything, or it's just chat. Yeah, so people will say positive things to you, but and that it could be chat, but people say positive things to you, then then that's obviously a good thing, but yeah, it can be hopeful and that sort of things. But you can't, if people saying hopeful things to you, I mean, that's good, but you just, you can't take that, and you have to just, work with what you get. So sometimes people say positive things to you and it'll be nice, and other times they won't. But I mean, I guess the point of all these things is, I wouldn't, anytime someone says anything positive to you, it doesn't mean that you can't do something negative. It's just a little bit of encouragement. I guess is nice. Okay. Have you read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits? We're doing this book. Yeah, I did read that book a long time ago, Atomic Habits. I think it's a very good book. I like it. But again, I read it probably 7, 8 years. You said 215. So yeah, I think I read that when it came out. It's a good book. I think that, I don't remember exactly what it talked about, but it talks about, having certain habits. And if you have those habits, are going to help you advance and do really well in your career and life. And so, yes, I think Atomic Habits is good. I have certain atomic habits, like I will, get up every day at a certain time. I will try to exercise. I mean, I do exercise every day. I'll exercise every day. I will, write or, think about issues like this every day. And I think that helps me. So yeah, that's a great book. And I do recommend people read it. And yeah, I mean, it's a good book. But yeah, any books like this that you can find, I mean, it doesn't matter really what you read. It's just, you have to continually surround yourself with and learn positive information. If you do that, you're going to be, much more successful than people that aren't. And successful people do try to learn positive information each day. I would, I like to listen to, sometimes I watch TikTok videos, and and for whatever reason, I like positive advice. And so TikTok, will serve you information. It's got algorithms and things that you like. And so every time I watch TikTok, I'm just learning all this awesome stuff. And yesterday I was watching TikTok, and someone was talking about Steve Jobs. This is very interesting. And they said, and also the guy knew Steve Jobs very closely. He also knew Elon Musk. And he said that, when those guys sit down, like, they're like 80% productive. Like, they will come up with like 3 things that they really need to do. And they won't listen to all this noise in the background. They will just concentrate on whatever it is they're doing. And they will have, a certain number of things they're going to do one day. And when they do it, they're just very, very focused on them, and don't lose track of whatever it is. I thought that was interesting because, that's one piece of advice. Like, just, don't listen to all this noise and things around you. Just focus on what you're doing. And anytime you get advice like that or anything, I mean, it can be very helpful and make you a much more successful person. So I recommend books like that. I recommend, people that are very successful will constantly, fill their mind with positive information. Will be very helpful. Okay, what is your advice when someone with a positive narrative you admire changes their narrative to a negative one? So people do that all the time. People will have positive narratives. They will believe in themselves, will believe in what's possible. They'll be, very enthusiastic about working in law firms. They will do all these things that are positive narratives, and suddenly something will happen. Someone will approach them. They will have a bad experience. It will be critical of them, and all of a sudden they develop a negative narrative. So you need to constantly work on keeping your narrative positive. And it doesn't mean that you can't work in an environment and then have a bad experience. Everybody does, but you have to figure out how to pull yourself out of that and develop a positive narrative. And so many people, make this mistake of, getting negative. And why would you get negative? Like, if you've gone to college and it's 4 years, you've gone to law school, it's 3 years, maybe you've worked for 2 years. So now you're 7 years into this career, and something negative happens to you, or you think negatively about something after 7 years, and then suddenly you're negative, and not realizing that a career that you started at the age of, say, you're like 32 at this point, you still have 53 more years left in your career. So why would you, if something bad happens after 7 years, why would you suddenly, decide that, you have this career that could last another 53 years, develop a negative narrative? 'Cause that's just going to hurt you. So that doesn't make any sense. And so people do that all the time. It's not good. Okay. So these are good questions. Thank you. I'm gonna just keep answering. I am almost out of questions. So if you have any more, I'm happy to answer anything you're thinking of, like just whatever the question is, I can help you with it, hopefully. Just anything that, whatever. Yeah, how do I avoid falling into the trap of choosing a legal career path just because it seems like the smart or safe option? Well, whatever. I mean, you can choose different career paths. If you choose something that seems smart or safe, that just means maybe that you're risk averse, and that's okay. But the best thing is that I would recommend for everybody here is, certain things like, you can be passionate about, like certain types of work, like inspire you, like you might feel good about yourself doing it. And the idea is that, anything that you do in your life and career, you need to think to yourself, like, does this, whatever I'm doing, does this inspire me? Does this make me feel like good? Is this something I enjoy and can do? So what does that mean? So like if I'm doing what I'm doing right now, like talking to you and like writing and things like that, like that gives me power. Like I feel not power like in the sense that I have power, but it inspires me. It makes me feel good. I want to do it. I like it. I throw myself into it. I can see myself getting better at it, all those sorts of things. So you need to do work that gives you strength and makes you feel inspired and makes you feel good about yourself and makes you feel like you can get better and better. So if you don't feel like that, like if you're doing something like, and like I said earlier, like it takes about 5 years to learn how to be an attorney. But if you're doing something and it's not inspiring you or not making you feel good about yourself, you're looking forward to getting home all the time and you just, then that's not a good career for you. Like you need to put yourself in a position where you're doing something that inspires you and where you feel good about yourself. So what does that mean? So, certain people, like an athlete might, really enjoy, basketball when they're doing it their happiest. There's a famous story. I don't remember what it was, maybe some of the Holocaust or something, but it's like, maybe I don't know. No, it's not the Holocaust. This guy's like, 90 years old. He's like, handicapped. He's barely alive, and then he sits down in front of a piano, and all of a sudden, like, he starts playing the piano, and he comes to life. He just looks like he's not dead anymore. Like he's playing all these beautiful songs on the piano, and just suddenly it's like a different person. So what does that mean? It means that like he loves, the piano gives him, strength. It inspires him. He plays a piano. It makes him feel better about himself. He's just he's suddenly alive. And so the work you do should make you feel alive. It should inspire you. It should make you feel, good about yourself, like you want to improve. And so that doesn't mean that, working in a law firm is going to do that. That might be, doing public interest. It might not even be practicing law. It could be, whatever. I mean, people that open pizza parlors or whatever. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but you have to do something that inspires you. Because if you do something that inspires you, what's going to happen is work becomes fun. And if work becomes fun, then you don't mind doing it. You like getting up during the day and doing it. You like, you feel good about yourself when you're doing it. It gives you like more inspiration, like you want to continue doing it. You look forward to doing it. So again, that doesn't mean that for everybody, it doesn't mean practicing law, but whatever your practice area, whatever you're doing in a law firm, whatever you're doing should make you feel good about yourself. I know, I talk about successful attorneys. I know one guy that owns a personal injury attorney law firm with another guy. And the other guy that, they do very well. He's got like, 50 attorneys working for him. But the other guy he works with does all the, filing of cases, the, negotiating, hiring attorneys, all this. And this guy, all he does, and he was an attorney, went to Harvard Law School. He was one of the youngest graduates, if not the youngest graduate in the history of Harvard Law School. And he graduated at like something ridiculous, like 19. And, all he likes to do, he was an attorney at Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, he got all these offers, but all this guy likes to do is what inspires him is just doing the marketing for the law firm, doing a search engine, buying ads on search engines and, negotiating with people to put, banners on buses, and that's what he likes. And that makes him feel good. And because he does what he likes, he liked it better than practicing law. He has built this huge law firm, not even practicing law, just marketing. And so you have to do what you like and what makes you feel inspired and happy. If you don't do what makes you feel inspired and happy, then you're not going to have a good life. So why wouldn't you, do what inspires you and makes you feel good about yourself? I mean, it's the smartest possible thing you can do. Okay, next question. And I'm trying to answer all these. There's a few more, but let's go to the next question. So next question is, how can I prepare for a lateral move to another law firm? Well, I think the smartest thing you can do, preparing for the lateral move, first of all, I mean, you have to learn how to look for a job. So I don't think I'll talk a little bit about that. But, so finding a job, what do you do to prepare? You will apply to as many places as you possibly can, try to get as many interviews as you possibly can, because that will give you, better insight into, you'll get offers or talk to places which hopefully match your interest in what you can see yourself doing. So that's the first thing. But the next thing about preparing for a lateral move to another law firm is you need to, before you get to the new law firm, like let's say you get a job, you need to look at like everything, you need to think about, what did I do wrong in my last job? Like, what can I do to improve? What do I see successful people doing? So when I remember when I only did one lateral move, but I remember before I did that lateral move, I listened to this like goal setting workshop. It was Anthony Robbins. It was like, setting your goals for the next, 6 months, the next 2 years, the next 10 years, 20 years, like who do you see yourself being? Who do you want to be? Like what kind of, what is your goals? Like what do you want to do? Like, where do you want to be 6 months from now? Where do you want to be a year from now? And very few people do this. I mean, as a matter of fact, 98% of people, or 99, don't even set goals. And there's a famous study. There's some question about everything's true, but it's a famous study. It was everybody graduating from Yale College, like in 1965 or 1970, and they asked everyone that was graduating, like, what do you want to be? Like, what are your goals? And so certain people would write down, I want to be like a world-renowned physician. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be an engineer. I don't think Yale is an engineer, but whatever these people wanted to be, they wrote it down and they turned it in, to whoever these researchers were. And then 30 years later, they went back to all the people like that, because again, 90% of the people didn't know what they wanted to do. So they went back to all these people and they surveyed them and they asked them, what their incomes were, like, what their net worth was and all this kind of stuff. And it was something like, that 10% of people that had goals when they were graduating and knew what they wanted to be, it was something like, the net worth of that, 10% was like, 3 times what the net worth, say the net worth of those 10% was $200 million, then the other, and this, 2000 or 1990, the net worth, say, was like $200 million, that 10%. And then the net worth of the other 90% was like, 30 million or what. The number was like 1/3 of what the net worth was. So, I guess I'll just show this example. So 10% was at, like, say they were at, 500, not would be like, let's say 200, let's say 500 million, just as, this isn't probably the real number, but 500 million, right? That was the net worth of them. And then, but also they did like happiness greater, happiness better, all this kind of stuff, etc. More career stability, but whatever these types of things that they found out was 10% of the grad, more stability. So that was after 30 years, right? So 30 years. So then the other 90%, of those people that didn't have goals. So, year one, I guess you'd say year one, equals goals, know what they want, or, have a good idea, know what they want, when they're graduating, what they're graduating. And then, so that was, 10% had that, had all this. So 10% had all this stuff, the goals, etc. And then that's, and then after 30 years, that 10% like would have like, had something, or the 90%, that the 90% of people without goals, that's 90%, in total, might have had, a net worth of, say 200 million, I don't know. But whatever, whatever it is, that 90%, and, less happiness, less career stability, or less, whatever, less stability, all these things. And so, so the idea is that, if you took, that 500 million for 10%, and then at 90% in total had 200 million. So the people that knew what they wanted to do, were, just multiple times. It's not 200. It's not that, it's like 90%. So that's like, what would you say? You'd say average net worth of, like 500,000. I don't know, which is an example, or not even that, maybe average net worth, let's just say 300,000 or something equals, 300,000, maybe 300K. And then, the average net worth of 500 million, might have been like, 2 million. I don't know what it'd be, maybe let's just say 1 million. But, the idea would be that that the people that knew what they wanted to do, their average net worth was, 3 times what the people that didn't know what they wanted to do, or something like that. So that's the power of that. And then, obviously there's other things that go into it, like their happiness or satisfaction. But the point is, if you know what you want to do, you're going to be many times more successful than people that don't know what they want to do. And you're going to be happier, you're going to make more money, all these sorts of things. So it's important to, really know what you want to do. So you're preparing for a lateral move to another firm, goal setting, like thinking about, what's going to make you successful, what you can do differently, how do you, how do you become a better person, or how do you do well? Okay, next question. I just got another interview with a different firm that's larger, and it's a Zoom interview. Okay, thank you for these kind of questions. These are actually important to people. I just got an interview with a different firm that's larger, and it's a Zoom interview. Is it common for the interview to be recorded and shown to other partners, and are Zoom calls the trend? Does it depend on the firm? Okay, so yeah, so most law firms now will do initial interviews because it's just easier. They don't have to, leave their offices and schedule you to come in and things. So most law firms will do Zoom interviews for the first one. Is it common for the interview to be recorded and shown to other partners? No, I mean, people honestly don't have time for that. So the interview may say it's being recorded when you log in, but, generally people aren't going to share it. They're not going to record it and show it to other partners. People don't have time for it. It's either they like you and you think you can do a good job there, or they don't. So no. So most of the time, the law firm will not show your Zoom interviews, even if record other people. People just do not have time for that. And yes, Zoom calls are the trend. Most law firms will do it. We'll do it for initial screening interviews, but they typically will prepare to actually bring you into the office for real interviews. People do get hired over Zoom, but honestly, most law firms will end up calling you in for interviews when they do a second. Okay, if there's any other questions, I would recommend asking them now, because I think we're almost out of them. By the way, I mean, this is awesome. Like, I think we started this call with like close to 1,000 people, and now there's like 600. So I mean, everyone stick around. It's very smart. I mean, because you're learning stuff, and a lot of people will just watch the webinar and then won't always ask questions. So thank you for asking questions. Okay. So how do you continue your practice when you feel burnt out and no longer enjoy it? Well, if you're doing something you don't enjoy and you're burnt out, then you shouldn't be doing it. So, you may be working in a place where there's too many hours or something, you don't like the people, which is one thing, but if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you need to find something else to do. If it could be about the environment, it could be about the people you're working with, which it could be you're working too many hours or whatever. So, if that's the case, but you really like the work you're doing, then that's okay, and you should just find another place to do it. But if you don't enjoy the work you're doing, if it doesn't inspire you, if it doesn't make you feel good about yourself, if you're not improving, you're just unhappy, then, then you shouldn't be doing it. I mean, that's just how it works. I mean, you can't do something that doesn't inspire you and give you energy. Now, one thing I did talk about in the webinar is you get people to go to Yale Law School. So people go to Yale Law School, are often inspired by things much greater than grinding away in a law firm. They may be inspired by public interest, may be inspired by change in the world, becoming politicians, all these things, that certain people are inspired by and give them energy. So, you want to try to do things that inspire you and give you energy. So, someone like, I mean, two examples, if you have Bill Clinton, graduated from Yale Law School, and he went to teach at University of Arkansas Law School before becoming a politician and governor of Arkansas. Then you have Barack Obama at the Harvard Law School, the Harvard Law Review, and these things. He graduated from law school and became, adjunct or whatever he was. So, University of Chicago Law School, and then became like a community organizer, and then, ended up getting a job as a senator, and then became president of the United States. And so, these are people that were motivated by things greater than working in law firms and things that inspired them. And so that's what you should do. You should be doing something that inspires you and gives you power. And people that do that, just think about Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, they become president of the United States. I mean, wow, but they wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have reached anywhere near their levels of success had they stayed working in law firms. That's just crazy. Like, so you do what inspires you and gives you energy. How do I know if I should leave my law firm for a better opportunity? Yeah. So this question is, how do I know if I should leave my law firm for better opportunities? If it's a better opportunity and you're going to get better experience and you're going to learn more about your practice area and you're going to become a better attorney, then yes, of course you should leave your law firm. I mean, you want to put yourself in the best places possible. And better opportunity doesn't always mean more money. It could be, more experience in your practice area. It could be, working alongside people that you like. And one thing a lot of people don't think about is like, the culture of the firm and the people you're working with can make a huge difference in how happy you are. So you could work in a law firm where you don't like the people or you're unhappy, and that's not a good opportunity for you. If you find a place that where you're happier, it's going to make a huge difference. Okay, next question. I think this is the last question. I mean, there's a lot of questions that people ask that I've already kind of answered. Oh, wait, there's actually a better question here. Isn't this about what I just said? Isn't alleging sexual harassment malicious prosecution? Yeah, I mean, alleging sexual harassment when it's not true, I don't think it would be under malicious prosecution. It might be under malicious prosecution, but why would you do that? I mean, it's no, you don't do that. I mean, the thing is, like, a lot of people don't understand too, is like the people that you encounter, like earlier in your career, or whenever you encounter them, are going to be around forever. I mean, if you do something that's negative to someone that isn't true, like, those people are going to talk about you forever. So, you never want to, I mean, those would be people that if they encounter people that in your practice will say bad things about you. And you don't want that. The best attorneys attorneys typically do not, this is what people don't understand. Like the culture of practicing law is, most attorneys will not say someone's a bad attorney to other people. They won't really criticize other attorneys to other attorneys because it's just not something, in terms of saying negative things about them and they were fired or bad, it's just not something that attorneys do. And a lot of young attorneys don't understand that. But if you do, they just don't. If you do something that's completely malicious and wrong, like making some of a sexual prostitution, that's gonna, that will affect you for the rest of your career. Like people will, remember that and not like it. I'm sure that was a question for you. It's just you don't want to ever do anything that's gonna, reflect on your morality and things like that. Yeah, next question. Yeah, I think this is probably the last question, just to make sure. Still a lot of questions, but I already answered most of them. Please address ageism. Okay, this is a good question. Thank you for whoever asked this one. Please address ageism, especially for women. Thank you. Okay, so people are discriminated against, not just in the law firms, but pretty much in almost every employer, are discriminated against because of their age. So that's just how it works. So if you're, once you get older, and the idea is the reason people don't like hiring older attorneys is they typically are considered set in their ways, meaning it's very difficult for, that they're considered, people that, are used to doing things a certain way. They may also be considered angry that they haven't advanced, kind of tainted. They may, when they're older, the presumption is they don't want to work as hard, get ahead. The presumption is that maybe they haven't succeeded, because of different things. So why would you hire someone like that? So there's all these kind of negative thoughts and things about older people. It's just how it works. And so same thing with women or men. It just doesn't matter. So there is discrimination against them, but it's not just, law firms. It's in any type of employer. So, when people get older, they're just, that's how it works. They're, whatever the employer is just won't, there's discrimination against them. It's just how it works. So it's just, it's nothing that anyone can do about it. It's just how it is. People are discriminating against because of their age, and it's, It's because, again, they're considered not to as work as hard. They're considered that they might be angry. They're considered that maybe they didn't get ahead because there's something wrong with them. Typically they're considered as people that aren't willing to work as hard because maybe they have families and or they just don't want to work as hard anymore. So why would you hire someone that doesn't want to work hard? Why would you hire someone that, is angry that they're not getting ahead? Why would you hire someone that hasn't gotten ahead because there's something wrong with them? Why would you hire someone that, is negative, that, I mean, all these sorts of things. So it's not just law firms, it's, every employer. So employers want to hire people that are young, that are enthusiastic, that want to get ahead, that are going to, work very, very hard and things. So how do you overcome that? You can overcome it. I mean, you can, come across as someone that wants to work really hard, that wants to get ahead, all these sorts of things. But in general, it's just, that's how it works. You need to be, just kind of aware that, that can happen, when you get older. So how do you overcome it? You have to be the negative of everything that I've talked about. And there are people that will hire older attorneys all the time, or, but it becomes harder the older you get. I think this is the last question. So, then I'll answer this and then I think we'll be done. Maybe there's another question I'll check for, but there's a lot of questions. Most of them I've answered in one form or another. What are your favorite books about positive inspiration? I mean, there's a lot of books. Like I said, some people get, inspired by the Bible. Some people get inspired by, books like Think and Grow Rich. Some people get inspired by, there's all sorts of books you can read that are inspirational. So what do you do to find inspirational books? You watch nonfiction on Amazon or whatever, and positive books, or you read about positive books people have talked about, and all these sorts of things. And so, you try to find, inspirational books that appeal to you. So some people, might be inspired by, the Psalms in the Bible, or by, reading about Jesus, or, by reading about, Kabbalah and Judaism, and whatever it is. I mean, you have to read what interests you. So you can't, you have to read books that appeal to you, that you believe, speak to you in some sense. Okay, well, let me just see here, make sure I got everything. Okay, this next question, I'll just answer this real quick. Someone says, I'm not sure I have a narrative, but I have a vision. Is that the same thing? Yeah, so a vision can shape your narrative. So if you have a vision of what you want to be, then you do that. I mean, then that will affect your narrative and how you see things. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being in this webinar. Again, I commend everyone for spending all this time. What I will tell you is that, if you spend a lot of time on this today, it's like over 3 hours, and, you will have learned a lot of things. And when you learn this sort of stuff, it's things that, you won't see always immediate results from, but you will remember these things, and it will help you throughout your life and your career. Because what you learned about today is huge. I mean, just this webinar, if you've been here, you understand it. I mean, can dramatically change the course of your life. And I'm just telling you things that I've learned and that have helped me, and I've seen help other people. But so I would tell you that, nice job. You learned a lot, and you take this information, you apply it to your career and your life, and your life will never be the same. I hear from people every week. I mean, they'll call me, they'll send me emails and things, and their LinkedIn that adopted certain things, whether it's to get a job or changing their outlook in their life, and they've become extremely successful because of it. And it's not just me you can listen to. I mean, there's all sorts of different people that you can surround yourself with and learn from that will help you. And it's just so awesome, because you can literally, by learning this kind of thing, or by, not just for me, but whatever, you can just change the entire course of your life and your legacy when you die, and what your family thinks of you, what your kids think of you, and all these sorts of things are what, how you think of yourself, and financial success, the spiritual success, all these sorts of things. So, nice work for everyone being in this webinar. And, I like this topic. Hopefully, I'll see everyone next week. Thanks. Have a good, rest of your day. Oh, give me 1 second here. I'm almost done. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.